Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It was supposed to be a routine renovation. That's what made it worse. Not a haunting in a crumbling asylum. Not some ancient house steeped in death. Just a regular suburban home. White picket fence, red mailbox, fresh paint, a backyard with a swing swaying gently in the breeze. And yet, behind its walls, something waited. Not just something old or something angry. No. What we found was hungry. And it had been waiting for us, me, specifically. The door wasn't supposed to be there. The blueprints never showed it. But once we opened it, things changed. The house changed. We changed. And whatever was on the other side of that door, it wasn't done. The beginning came quietly, deceptively so. I'd bought the place off a foreclosure auction. Cheap, oddly cheap for its size and location. A 5-bedroom, 2-story house in Elderglen. A neighborhood that practically glistened with PTA potlucks and morning joggers. Sure, it needed some work. But I'd flipped worse. I was good at spotting potential under cracked plaster and termite dust. And at first, it looked like a dream project. The previous owners left everything behind. Furniture, clothing, children's toys, even the family photo still hanging above the fireplace. That should have been the first red flag. No one leaves like that. No one leaves everything. But I brushed it off. Maybe they were in a hurry. Maybe the bank repossessed the place faster than expected. I told myself 100 things to keep from noticing what was staring me in the face. On my first night inside, I didn't sleep. The power hadn't been restored yet, and every creak of the old wood felt louder, more deliberate. There was a constant sense of something pacing above me, even though I'd already checked and rechecked every inch of the upstairs. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through a layer of dust I couldn't see. But I blamed my nerves. New place, new sounds. I told myself I'd adjust. The second night, I found the door. I'd been tearing down the drywall in the back hallway, just past the kitchen. The plan was to extend the space, maybe open up a reading nook, but as I stripped the layers of plaster and wood, I hit something unexpected, metal. Not a beam, not a pipe, it was a handle. Old, rusted, partially embedded in the wall. I pulled away more, heart picking up speed. Soon the whole outline was visible. A door. An entire metal door sealed into the wall, completely hidden beneath decades of construction. The handle was cold. Too cold. It bit into my palm like frost. But I couldn't stop. Something about it pulled at me, some mix of fear and fascination I couldn't shake. I got the door fully cleared and stared. There was no lock, no keyhole. Just a round handle and a weight behind it that suggested it hadn't moved in years. I shouldn't have opened it. God, I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. It groaned like a grave opening, and behind it, darkness, pure black. I don't mean the absence of light, I mean wrongness. It swallowed the beam of my flashlight, bending it inward like the light didn't want to go there. The smell was worse, rot, damp, something like burnt hair and copper. I stepped back. Every instinct screamed to seal it back up. But something in the dark moved. I didn't see it exactly. I felt it, like a ripple against my skin, a sound too low for ears. The kind of movement that doesn't belong to animals or people. Something that was waiting. Still, I didn't close the door. I should have. But instead, I left it open. I told myself I'd come back with better lights, maybe a camera. I told myself I'd just found some old storage room or bomb shelter, and maybe I could still believe that if things had stopped there. They didn't. That night, I heard it breathing, not from above this time, from below. Slow, thick breaths that made the floor vibrate slightly under my mattress. It came in bursts, like whatever was down there was struggling. Or maybe pretending to struggle. When I turned on the lights, it stopped. But as soon as I lay down again, it resumed, like it knew when I was most vulnerable. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, the air in the house felt heavier, like the humidity had turned to molasses. And the shadows where light should have been. The sunlight streaming through the kitchen window bent around certain corners now. The hallway where the hidden door waited felt longer somehow. I measured it, 16 feet yesterday, 23 today. I measured again, still 23. I went to check the door. It was closed. I hadn't closed it. The handle was warm this time, like it had just been touched. I didn't want to touch it again, but the dread of not knowing was worse than the fear. So I opened it. Behind the door wasn't just the same darkness as before. Now, there were steps leading down. Stone steps, slick and crumbling, leading into a corridor that didn't fit under the structure of the house. I had the blueprints. I'd checked. There was no basement, no crawl space. Nothing. But here it was. I only went 2 steps down. That was enough. Something brushed my face. Gentle, like fingers. Cold fingers. I turned and ran. Slammed the door shut. Piled furniture in front of it. I tried to tell myself it was some old construction quirk. An old wine cellar maybe, forgotten and sealed off. But that didn't explain the fingers. Or the whisper I'd heard. Just one word, too close to my ear to be a memory. Stay. Over the next few days, things spiraled fast. Lights flickered constantly. My phone wouldn't hold a charge. Mirrors reflected things that weren't there. Shapes, eyes, sometimes even myself in a pose I hadn't taken. I tried to leave once. Got in my truck, turned the key. Engine wouldn't even click. The neighbors, never home. Their yards stayed immaculate, their sprinklers ran on time, but I never saw a single person. Not one. And then came the dreams. It started with the sound, a metallic creak, the door. Then darkness, but alive, pulsing. I'd see myself walking down those stairs, deeper than possible, into tunnels slick with black moss. The walls would whisper, not in words, but in memories. My mother's scream. My father's silence, the night I lost my sister in the cornfield. The things I never speak of. The things I forgot I remembered. The dreams would end with me reaching a door, another door, and just before I opened it, I'd wake up, soaked in sweat, gasping. One night, the dream changed. This time I opened the door, and on the other side was me, not like a mirror. It was me. Same face, same clothes, but the eyes were empty. Not blind, not lifeless, just empty, like they had never seen. And he smiled, wide, too wide. "Took you long enough," he said, and then he stepped out. That's when I woke up, but something was different. The air wasn't mine anymore. The house felt watched, like it wasn't just my nightmare that had crossed over. Something else had come back with me, and I wasn't alone. That day, every mirror in the house shattered. All at once. Not a crack, not a chip. Shattered. As if something had screamed through them. I stepped into the bathroom and saw the last shards on the floor still twitching, like they were trying to form something. My reflection, maybe. But wrong. Pieces of me, smiling in some, crying in others, bleeding in one. I went back to the door that night. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could close it for good. Maybe I thought I could reason with it. But when I got there, the furniture I'd piled in front of it was gone. Not moved. Gone. And the door. Wide open. This time, I didn't feel fear. I felt hunger. Not mine. The hallway beyond the door wasn't just longer. It was alive. Breathing. Walls pulsing like lungs. And at the far end, something waited. Not a shape. Not a person. Just presence. And it knew my name. I ran. Of course I ran. But the house had changed. The front door led to a hallway. The hallway looped back into the kitchen. The windows showed nothing but black. Not night, just black. Like the world had been erased. The walls whispered my secrets. Things I hadn't even told myself. You cried when he died. You lied when she asked. You wanted her gone. That's when I knew. This wasn't a haunting. It was a mirror. That door didn't lead to a basement. It led to something far older. Something that fed on people like me. People who hide things, bury things, pretend they're whole when they're fractured. That door was hungry. It needed guilt, regret, fear. It showed you your worst, and then offered something in return. But I wasn't ready to see what the offer was. Not yet, because that night I heard the voice again. Not in my head, from the hallway. Closer, and it said, "You opened it. Now let us in." The voice didn't leave. It wasn't like an echo. It didn't fade. It stayed, curling itself around the corners of my ears, slithering through every gap in the drywall, hiding between the floorboards, like it had always belonged there. It whispered the same 5 words on loop. "You opened it. Let us in." Not loud, not urgent, patient. Patient like rot. Patient like something that had waited for years, just for someone dumb or curious enough to turn the handle. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I stood frozen in the middle of my own house, breathing like each inhale might trigger something. I remember blinking, once, twice, trying to find logic where there was none. But that was the thing, this wasn't a moment you could explain or rationalize. This wasn't a bad dream. The drywall dust still clung to my sleeves. My hands were scraped from where I'd torn at the furniture that used to block the door, now vanished. And the cold, unnatural draft coming from the open stairwell was very, very real. I should have run. Left everything. Walked until my shoes gave out and my legs stopped working. But I stayed. Not out of bravery. Out of the same twisted instinct that makes you stare into dark water, wondering just how deep it goes. I backed away from the open door, never turning from it, and locked myself in the bathroom, the one room without a window. I shoved the dresser against the door, sat on the closed toilet, and waited for something, anything, to explain this. Nothing came. The next sound I heard wasn't a whisper. It was a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps against the other side of the wall. Not the bathroom door, the wall. Followed by another 3, then 3 more, farther off this time. Like someone was tapping from inside the walls themselves, moving slowly through the structure, listening, searching. I sat still for an hour, maybe more. Time had lost its meaning. My phone still wouldn't turn on, not even when plugged in. The clock above the mirror had stopped. 3:19 a.m. Forever frozen. When I finally forced myself out of the bathroom, the house had changed again. That's the only way to describe it. It had shifted. Subtle things at first. The hallway was 2 steps longer. The painting above the fireplace, a sailboat at sunset, was now a burning barn. The couch cushions had become soaked, as if left out in a storm, but the air was bone, dry, and something new had appeared. Carved into the wall next to the door I'd opened were 2 words, scratched in crude, deep lines. Freddie U.S. I backed away slowly, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. And then I heard it again, the voice. Not the whisper. This was a new voice. Higher, childlike. "Why won't you come down, Daddy?" I froze. I don't have children. I never have. The voice giggled, a sound so twisted it made my skin rise like static. I turned toward the stairwell, toward the gaping dark mouth in the hallway, and I swear I saw something move. Just a flicker. A silhouette no taller than my waist. It darted backward into the shadows before I could even blink. I knew I couldn't stay. I had to get out. I ran to the front door, but it was gone. Not just locked, gone. The frame was still there, but behind it, instead of the street and the familiar tree-lined sidewalk, was another room, identical to the one I stood in. The same furniture, same walls, like the house had folded in on itself, or multiplied. I reached through and felt nothing. No air, no temperature, just wrongness. My panic began to take shape now, clear, biting animal panic. I needed to move. I needed to find an edge. Any edge. Some place where the house stopped and the world resumed. I started opening every door, every cabinet. Behind the fridge, more darkness. The linen closet, now stairs spiraling up, where the blueprints had shown only a crawl space. The attic hatch. No ladder. Just a long, narrow tunnel of flesh-colored walls and pulsing, throbbing sounds. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. The house no longer played by rules. Rooms repeated. Walls blood. Windows looked into other rooms instead of the outside. I passed what looked like a living room 3 times, except each version was slightly off. First time, the fireplace was lit. Second, it had a portrait of me above it, only the eyes were gone. Third time, someone sat in the armchair, motionless, face hidden in shadow. I didn't stop to see who. Eventually, I found myself back at the metal door, the original one, still open, still breathing. I stared down into that abyss, and for the first time, I thought I saw the bottom. Just a faint red glow, pulsing like a heartbeat, and the hint of movement. But it wasn't people. It wasn't anything you could describe with words that don't ruin your mind a little. The shapes below crawled, some backward, some sideways, none with any grace or purpose. And above it all, a sound. Not words this time. Chewing. That's when I understood. It was hungry, but not for flesh. That was too easy. This thing fed on something deeper. It fed on guilt, memory, shame. It fed on truths. It didn't need to kill me. It needed me to rot slowly, from the inside out. To peel back every layer of denial and pride, until all that remained was a raw, bleeding soul. Easy pickings for something that waits in the dark. The voice returned, softer now. Come feed us, Daddy. Tell us your sins. My hands began to tremble. Not because I was scared, though I was, but because deep down, I wanted to answer. Some part of me felt like if I told it everything, if I laid my soul bare, it would let me go, like a confessional. But I knew better. You don't barter with things that speak through walls. You don't confess to voices that don't sleep. I turned to leave. And that's when I saw the photo. It was pinned to the wall just outside the door, a simple Polaroid. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, standing in front of this very house, smiling, holding a stuffed rabbit. The back read Emma, 2004. I flipped through the documents I'd taken from the auction. The previous owner's name was Harris. Daniel Harris. No mention of a daughter, but there it was, Emma, 2004. I found more photos in the upstairs closet, tucked inside a shoebox covered in dust. All different kids, all standing in front of this house. Always smiling, always alone, no parents, no siblings, just the house. There were dozens of them. No dates past 2010. That's when the dread turned to something colder. Something that wrapped itself around my spine like a snake. I hadn't opened that door. I had triggered it. This wasn't the first time it had fed. This wasn't the first renovation. Not the first hidden door. The house, whatever it was, wanted to be found. It lured people in. Dreamers, flippers, families looking for a deal. And when they moved in, it woke up. The house was the trap. The door was the mouth. And the voices, those were the bones left behind. I'm writing this now from the corner of what used to be the master bedroom. I've carved every word into the wall with a rusted nail I found under the bed. No pens left. No electricity. No sense of time. I don't know if I'll make it to morning, or if there is a morning. But if you're reading this, don't open the door. Don't even look for it. And if you already did, then run. Because the things that speak through walls, they remember your name, and they never stop whispering. By the 3rd day, the house no longer pretended to be anything else. It didn't try to act like a home, didn't hide behind suburban charm or the faint scent of wood polish and mothballs. The illusion was over. Now it was just alive and aware that I knew, and worse, it enjoyed being known. Every hour bled into the next with no sense of sunlight, no clear night or day. The clocks had long since stopped. The fridge was warm inside, the freezer door hanging slightly open like it had been chewed. My reflection in the windows lagged behind when I moved, often pausing longer than it should have, as if considering whether to follow at all. The silence had grown heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes when something listens. Waits, judges. I tried to stay upstairs, away from the metal door. I moved my mattress to the 2nd floor and tried to wall off the stairwell with what I had. Dresser, bed frame. A door taken from the bathroom and nailed to the hallway, but nothing held, nothing stayed. No matter how I arranged the space, the door was always there. Sometimes it appeared at the end of the hall, sometimes in the mirror. Once, I swear it was inside the closet, just barely visible between the coats like a grin in the dark. On the fourth night, the voices changed. They began to argue. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through a cracked window, but then the tones became too clear, too specific. One was low and rasping, like someone coughing up gravel. The other was high, almost musical. Both were speaking words, but not in any language I'd ever heard. The strange part wasn't the sound. It was the emotion behind it. They were fighting. One kept repeating something sharp, over and over, like a warning. The other responded with laughter. Dry, choking laughter that seeped through the vents and walls like smoke. That night, I found writing on the bathroom mirror again. 3 new words, just smeared across the glass in something that looked like blood, but smelled like rusted pennies. Don't trust her. Her. I didn't sleep. Instead, I paced the second floor like a prisoner, trying to ignore the creaking beneath my feet. The floorboards no longer matched the structure of the house. Sometimes a step took me farther than it should have, almost like I was walking into a different home altogether. I stopped counting the doors. Too many, and never in the same place twice. At around what I thought was 3 a.m., I heard footsteps. Light, barefoot, not mine. They came from the hallway. The same pattern, again and again. 5 steps, pause. 5 steps, pause. Then a giggle. A child's giggle. Emma, I whispered. The footsteps stopped. The air thickened. Then came the creak of a door hinge, slow and deliberate, followed by a voice that wasn't hers. Too deep, too wet. She's not here anymore. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My legs locked, and my mouth went dry. The presence behind me pulsed like heat, close enough to touch, but not touching, just watching. Then, silence. When I finally turned, the hallway was empty, but something had been left behind. A single, waterlogged shoe, child-sized, stuffed with old, brittle leaves. That was the first time I cried. Not because I was scared. I was far past that, but because I realized then this house wasn't feeding on me. It was showing me what had already happened. Over and over again, like it was proud, or lonely. Downstairs, I found new pictures on the walls, photos I hadn't seen before, black and white portraits of children, some smiling, most not, each frame carved with a date 1982, 1994, 2001. The most recent, Emma's, was dated 2004. All of them stood in the same spot, in front of this very house. Same angle, same distance. Only the details changed. The tree in the yard, the shape of the mailbox, the swing set. All gone now. I took them down, one by one, stacked them in a corner. But when I turned my back, they were back on the wall. Only now I was in the final photo, just barely visible in the window, behind the glass, face pale, eyes wide, looking down at the girl standing outside. I don't remember that moment. I don't remember ever being in the window. The next time the voice spoke, it wasn't a whisper. It screamed.
Why are you? Bro, GHTITBK!
It came from all around. From the vents, the pipes, the attic. The scream rattled the windows and made the floor quake beneath my feet. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, but the voice didn't stop. It didn't need ears to be heard. It tore through thought, through memory, through the core of me. Every regret I'd buried, every failure, every cruel word I'd told someone I loved. They came rushing back, uninvited, raw and loud. When the sound finally stopped, the air felt scorched. The walls pulsed like a wound. I vomited. Then I saw her, not Emma, not the voice. Her. She stood at the base of the stairs, pale, hair clinging to her face, clothes that didn't quite fit right, too long in the arms, too tight at the waist, her face blurred like a smear on old glass. But her eyes knew me. They weren't angry, not even sad, just patient. Come back, she said softly, It's not done yet. I didn't move. Couldn't speak. She took a step forward. The floor didn't creak beneath her. She moved like someone walking underwater. Slow. Intentional. I was like you once, she said. I thought I could change it. I thought I could save them. I shook my head. I didn't want to know what them meant. But you opened the door, she said. So now it sees you. Her face twisted slightly. Not a snarl. Not a smile. Just something off, like her skin didn't quite fit right. She raised her hand slowly and pointed to the ceiling above us. She's in the attic now, she whispered. And she's so hungry. Then she vanished. Not like a ghost. Not like a dream.
Just gone. No sound.
No smoke. No drama, just empty space. And above me, the attic hatch creaked open. I didn't want to go up. But I had to know. So I climbed the ladder. The attic was colder than I expected. Not just cool, dead cold. Frost bit at my knuckles as I pulled myself through. The space was bigger than the house allowed, stretched in impossible directions. Shadows hung from the beams like drapes, and in the middle, lit by a single flickering bulb, was a tea party. 3 child-sized chairs, a cracked table. Stuffed animals slumped in positions that suggested they'd been waiting, and at the head of the table sat a figure. Emma. Only it wasn't her anymore. Her skin was too smooth, too plastic, her mouth stitched into a permanent smile. One eye missing, the other buttoned in. Her hands were human, still soft, still young, but the rest of her, crafted. Forced, she tilted her head at me. Play, she said, and I screamed. I didn't know how long I screamed. Time had lost its grip on this place, and my voice seemed to echo in loops, bouncing back at me with a delay that made it feel like someone else was screaming too, mocking me from just out of sight. Emma, or the thing wearing Emma, never moved. She just sat at the head of that impossible tea table with her stitched grin, button eye glinting dully under the flickering bulb. The stuffed animals beside her were grotesque approximations of comfort, their seams torn in places that resembled open mouths, stuffing trailing like entrails. One bear had human teeth sewn into its jaw. Another was headless, yet still upright, as though something invisible supported it. Play, she repeated, and this time the voice wasn't hers. It was mine. Perfectly mirrored. Hollow. Devoid of tone, like a reflection trying to speak. I backed toward the attic entrance, hand groping for the ladder. But the hole in the floor was gone. No trace of it. Just wooden boards where the opening used to be. I ran my palms along the floor, heartbeat pounding in my ears. No seams. No cracks. Just endless planks, warped and ancient, smelling of rot and rain and forgotten memories. Don't be rude, the Emma thing said. Her voice now deeper, older, male. My father's voice. I froze. That voice was one I hadn't heard in almost 20 years. Not since the accident. Not since the hospital room, where he lay, tubes everywhere, chest rising and falling only because machines demanded it. I never went back after the second visit. Couldn't. I told myself it was because I needed to work. But I knew the truth. I waited. The voice rasped from Emma's stitched mouth. You never came. You left me there. You let me die alone. I whispered. I didn't mean to. You forgot me. Something slammed behind me. A closet door that hadn't been there seconds before. It burst open on its own, revealing a hanging figure. A man. Clothes soaked in motor oil and dried blood. A belt tight around his neck. The body twitched once, then again. Then lifted its head to look at me. My father's face. Blue, bloated, lips cracked into a grin. I came back to play, son. I stumbled backward, hand brushing against something cold. A teacup. Porcelain, cracked, filled with black sludge that rippled as if stirred by invisible fingers. The smell hit me hard, sweet, cloying, undercut by something rancid, something alive. I dropped the cup. It didn't shatter. It didn't even fall. It hung in midair for a moment before melting into the floor, like hot wax on ice. I turned to run, but now the attic had walls, hallways branching out in directions that didn't exist in reality. One corridor sloped downward. Another seemed to rise at an angle that defied logic, its steps made from bones too small to be animal. On the third path, wallpaper peeled and twisted like skin, revealing twitching muscle beneath. I picked the middle one, not because it looked safer, but because it looked used. Like something had walked it often. Like something had chosen that route over and over. Footsteps echoed behind me as I ran, light at first like a child skipping, then heavier, faster. One set became many. A parade of unseen things matching my pace, just out of view. The corridor narrowed, forcing me to squeeze through a section barely wide enough for my shoulders. As I pushed through, the walls pulsed, wet, alive, breathing. A tongue darted out from a crack, licking my ear. I screamed again, shoved forward, and fell into a room. But this one was different. It looked like a child's bedroom. Posters on the wall. A mobile of stars and moons dangling from the ceiling. A twin bed with a race-a-car blanket. And on the floor, toys, so many toys, scattered as if left mid-play. A closet hung open, filled with clothes that looked untouched by time. And in the center, sitting with her back to me, was a little girl. Emma, the real one. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Her hands clutched the stuffed rabbit I'd seen in the photo. Its fur was matted, one ear missing. She didn't look at me when I stepped closer. Didn't respond when I said her name. But as soon as I touched her shoulder, the room blinked. That's the only way I can describe it. Everything shuddered for a split second. Then she turned, and I saw that her eyes were sewn shut. Thin black threads kept her lids closed. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, only dust. Dry, ancient dust pouring from her lips in a slow, steady stream. She lifted one trembling hand and pointed to the corner of the room. There was a mirror there. Not mounted, just leaning against the wall. In the reflection, I didn't see Emma. I saw me, but not now. Younger, maybe 9 or 10, sitting on a bed just like this one, crying into my hands, and behind my younger self, a tall shadow loomed. It had no face, no features, just a vague humanoid shape with impossibly long arms and a head that stretched into the ceiling like smoke. The boy, me, didn't notice. The shadow leaned down and whispered into his ear, and then the reflection smiled back at me. A wide, knowing grin that split my childhood face from ear to ear. I stumbled away from the mirror and crashed into another wall that hadn't been there before. The room folded again. Emma vanished. The toys gone. Only the mirror remained. And something behind me was breathing louder now. Heavier. Wet. As if the attic itself had lungs. You remember now? Said the shadow behind me. You brought her back. I turned to see it. Finally see what had been following me. But it was already inside me. Not a figure. Not a monster. A feeling. A truth. I'd lived in this house before. Not this exact one, maybe, but a place just like it. As a child. Briefly. My parents never talked about it. They'd moved within 6 months, said the house had plumbing issues. But I remember now. The door had always been there. I'd seen it once, down in the basement. And I'd opened it. Just for a second. Just enough. I ran again. No plan. No logic. Just raw instinct. I don't know how I found it, but eventually the attic spat me out into a hallway I recognized. The upstairs hallway. My mattress still on the floor. My hammer nearby, rusting from moisture that had no source. I collapsed onto the mattress, breathing hard, body shaking. The walls around me no longer whispered. They moaned. Soft, rhythmic, like something mourning its lost prey. But they didn't touch me. Not this time. I think the house was confused. Because something had changed. I remembered. And remembering, it hurt it. I don't know how I know that. But I do, like a fact I've always carried in my bones. The house feeds on what we hide. What we bury. Shame. Regret. Secrets we don't even admit to ourselves. But when those secrets come to the surface, when they stop being fuel, the house loses something. The next time I passed a mirror, I saw the house in my eyes. But it blinked first. And for now, that's enough. The house was quiet. Not safe, never that. but quiet in the way a forest is quiet before a predator strikes. A stillness thick with breathless tension. Something had changed since the attic, since I remembered. The walls no longer whispered quite as often, and the lights, when they flickered, seemed less erratic, almost cautious. Like the house was watching me now, uncertain. Maybe it wasn't used to being seen for what it was. But that quiet, that was worse than the noise. Because I knew it wouldn't last. I didn't sleep, though my body begged for it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's stitched lids, that rabbit falling apart in her arms, and behind her, the mirror. Always that mirror. I'd left it behind in the attic, but it followed me. Every surface now threatened to reflect it. The kitchen sink, the television screen. Even the oven door shimmered faintly, as though waiting for the right angle to show me something I didn't want to see. I tried to map the house again, foolish as it was. I took chalk from the toolbox and marked door frames, stairwells, walls, each time drawing a simple X to see if the house would move them again. At first, the mark stayed. I almost believed I was regaining control. Then I found 2 X marks on a door I hadn't opened. Identical. One drawn by me, the other scratched in. Not chalk, something else. Bone, nail. I didn't want to guess. It was deeper than my marks. Angrier, I stared at the door. It was in the hallway outside what used to be the master bedroom. A simple wooden frame, old brass knob, scuffed base. Nothing special. I'd walked past it dozens of times without noticing it. That was the trick of this house. It hid what it wanted until you were ready. Or until it was. I reached for the knob and stopped. Something in me, some whisper from the skin of my memory, begged me not to touch it. Not because of what was behind it, but because I was starting to forget. The details were slipping, not just what had happened since I got here, but things I'd known forever. I couldn't remember my mother's maiden name, my first dog's name, the street I grew up on. Little pieces, eroded like sand dragged into a drain. The more time I spent in the house, the more it scrubbed me, made room for itself. That door. It only opened when you forgot something important, and I just lost my sister's face. I could remember her laugh, the shape of her shadow in summer light, the fight we had about who got to use the Nintendo first. But her face, gone. Blurred out in my mind like a smudged photo. I ran to my wallet, pulled out the picture I always carried. Our last Christmas together. She was missing. Just an empty couch cushion beside me. My arm wrapped around nothing. I nearly screamed. The house rewarded me for forgetting. The door creaked open. I didn't want to look, but I did. Inside was a room I knew, not from this house, from a summer long ago. Bright blue walls, a bunk bed with race car sheets, posters of space and sharks, a desk covered in crayon scrawls, my childhood room, and in the center, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was me. A perfect 10-year-old version of me, scribbling in a notebook. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge my presence. Just kept writing. I stepped closer, heart hammering. "What are you doing?" I asked. No response. I crouched beside him. The notebook was filled with pages and pages of words. Tiny, looping handwriting. My handwriting. But the words were wrong. Over and over again, forget to remember. Remember to forget. Forget to remember. Remember to forget. It filled the whole page. Every page. I reached out to grab the notebook. He looked at me then, not with fear, not with curiosity, with hatred. "Don't touch that," he hissed. His voice wasn't mine. Too old. Too broken. "What is this place?" I asked. He stood slowly, letting the notebook fall shut with a soft thud. His eyes met mine. They were empty. Not blind, just blank. Like he hadn't seen the world in years. "You're not supposed to be here yet," he said. "You haven't forgotten enough." He walked to the wall and pointed at the mirror hanging there. Not a reflection this time. A door. Beyond the glass was a staircase, winding downward into blackness. "Go," he said, "before she comes." I turned to ask who, but the door behind me slammed shut. The room twisted. The walls grew taller. The ceiling pulled away like it was rising. Everything stretched. The floor turned to water. The boy me, gone. The notebook floated briefly, then sank without a sound. And from the mirror door came a noise. Not footsteps, not breathing, typing. Fast, furious. Keys slamming in a rhythm too fast for human hands. Then a whisper, she writes the new rules. A shadow approached behind the glass. Female, long arms. Hair like dripping ink. No face, only a mouth. Lips that moved without sound. She tapped the glass with a long, jointless finger. Once, twice. Then the mirror cracked. A single spiderweb fracture from corner to corner. I ran. I hit the wall where the door had been. It was a wall now. No knob, no seams. Just painted drywall, still faintly warm. The room began to hum. A low, steady vibration that rose into a scream. Not sound, but pressure. Like my skull was being squeezed from the inside. I clawed at the wall, kicked, punched. Nothing gave. Behind me, the mirror shattered. And she came through. I didn't look. I couldn't. Some instinct buried in the deepest part of me knew. If you look at her, she writes you out. The scream hit a pitch that made blood pour from my nose. And then, silence. I opened my eyes. Back in the hallway. Door gone. No sign of the room. The boy. The mirror. But I remembered now what I'd lost. My sister's name. It hit me like a gut punch. Rachel. I whispered it, testing the weight of it on my tongue. And somewhere deep in the house, something howled in pain. The house hadn't expected that. It thought I was too far gone. That its door had done its work. But remembering her, that was fire. That was defiance. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting. The house didn't like that. From below, in the metal door hallway, I heard footsteps. But this time, they were running. The footsteps didn't stop. They didn't slow, didn't hesitate. They sprinted from below, pounding up the hidden staircase behind the metal door like something was chasing them. Or like they were the ones doing the chasing. I stood at the top of the hallway, paralyzed by indecision. Do I run? Do I hide? Do I pretend this isn't happening anymore? But the sound was getting closer, and it carried something with it. A pressure in the air, like gravity had changed its mind. My ears popped. The walls shivered. Picture frames hanging in the hallway all tilted at once, then snapped their strings and fell, glass exploding against the floor like sharp, desperate applause. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the mouth of the stairwell. It was darker than night, darker than shadow. It pulsed like a wound, and then they came. Not people. Not quite. They wore skin. But it hung too loose or too tight, like it had been borrowed from corpses and poorly stitched. Their limbs were long, but not stretched, extended, like something had taken them apart and put them back together without reading the manual. And their eyes, or where their eyes should have been, were full of ink. Liquid black that dripped down their cheeks like tears and sizzled where it touched the floor. They didn't walk so much as skid, their feet never lifting, their long fingers dragging along the walls, leaving streaks that bubbled and hissed. One of them stopped, tilted its head, and spoke, not aloud. The words hit my skull like a railroad spike, straight into my thoughts. The scribes see you. Another stepped forward, carrying what looked like a typewriter fused into its chest. With every step, its ribs flexed and keys clacked. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the hallway, as if it were inside my brain. I tried to move, to bolt for any door, any exit. But the walls pulsed inward. The hallway shrank. The house was folding again. It wanted me closer to the door. The scribes, if that's what they were, didn't follow me as I backed away. They didn't need to. They stood between me and whatever lived in the basement, recording. Their heads twitched every few seconds like they were listening to something only they could hear. And then I realized. They were writing. Not with pens or paper, but with themselves. Their skin etched with thin black lines. Language dancing across their arms and legs like living tattoos. Sentences scratched into flesh, rewritten again and again. They were writing my story. No worse. They were rewriting it, and each keystroke, each twitch, cut a little deeper into who I was. I could feel it. Names blurring at the edge of my memory. Faces shifting. Events no longer feeling real. Moments I knew happened now felt fictional.
I screamed, Estiope!
The scribe with the typewriter in its chest tilted its head again, and in my mind, it said, "You wrote the contract the day you opened the door." What contract? What did I give them? Another scribe stepped forward. This one's hands had fused into long, metallic quills that pierced its own torso. It began dragging the points across its ribs like it was drawing blood. But instead of red, thick letters poured out. Physical letters, tangible, made of paper and smoke. They hovered in the air, rearranging themselves into sentences. One floated just inches from my face. "You asked to forget." We delivered. I stumbled back. My spine hit the wall. My chest burned with a new kind of panic. Not fear, but recognition. I had asked for this. Some part of me, long ago, had wanted this house. This forgetting. This burial of memory. This place where shame could be swallowed whole. And they gave it to me. They fed on it. Because I fed them. All at once, it came back in a flood. Not everything, just the moment. I was 15. After Rachel died, it was an accident. A lake. Late summer. I was supposed to be watching her, just for an hour. But I left. I went to meet someone. I thought she'd be fine. I told myself she could swim. When I got back, her shoe was floating near the dock. That same shoe I'd seen in the hallway days ago. I never told anyone what really happened. I let them believe it was just a horrible twist of fate. Just bad luck. But I knew. I'd whispered it into the dark once. "Please let me forget." And the door heard. I didn't remember where I said it, but now I understood when. That summer. That house. We moved shortly after. I forgot the layout. The door. I told myself it was trauma. That the gaps in my memory were my mind protecting me. But no. The house protected itself. I sank to my knees. My chest tightened. My hands curled into fists. The scribes watched me silently. No pity. No emotion. Just recording. And then the hallway changed again. The floor peeled like paper. Beneath it, a trapdoor. It didn't swing open. It dissolved, falling inward like ash. Below, a spiral staircase made of bones spiraled down into lightless dark. And from that pit, I heard typing again. Furious. 100 machines slamming away in disharmony. A chorus of authors. But they weren't writing about me anymore. They were writing over me, erasing and replacing who I was, what I remembered, why I came. I stood up, rage mixing with fear. You don't get to decide what I forget. The scribe closest to me blinked for the first time and whispered, not in my mind this time, but out loud, then descend. I knew what that meant. If I wanted to take anything back, my memory, my life, even Rachel's truth, I had to go down. Face what waited. Face what I'd invited. Face her. The scribe stepped aside. The staircase waited. And I understood then why the house let me remember. It wanted me to go down. It wanted a final page. An ending. A descent. I gripped the railing, bone cool beneath my fingers, and I started down. With every step, the sound of the typewriters grew louder, each click and clack carving away a piece of me. But I kept going. Because now, I remembered. And the house. It feared that more than anything else. The stairs went on forever. Not in the poetic sense, literally. No end. No bottom in sight. Just bone underfoot, bone in the rails, and the unrelenting clatter of keys echoing upward from whatever abyss waited below. My feet bled somewhere around the 100th step, but I couldn't stop. The scribes had made it clear. If I wanted to reclaim anything, I'd have to descend. And the worst part, the deeper I went, the more I felt myself fading. It wasn't death. Not pain either. It was worse. It was absence. Forgetting what I'd just thought, just felt. Words slid out of reach in my own brain like wet soap. My name lingered on the tip of my tongue, and then, gone. I couldn't remember my favorite color, my old address, the taste of orange juice. It leaked out of me in steady drips, pulled downward by the house like it was wringing my soul dry, eager to turn memory into fodder. But something kept me grounded. Rachel. Not her death, not even her face. I couldn't see it anymore, not clearly, but the weight of her, the sense of failure, the guilt I had worn like a second skin for years, quietly beneath every good deed, every fake smile. That pain wasn't fading. If anything, it burned hotter with every step. The house could strip my thoughts, but not my scars. And maybe that was the key. When the stairs finally ended, they didn't lead to a room. They opened into a void. A vast, hollow nothing that smelled like scorched parchment and burnt sugar. Floating in this space, miles wide in all directions, were books, thousands, maybe millions. Suspended midair, drifting in lazy circles like stars in some forgotten sky. There was no ceiling, no floor, only the library. But not any library humans built. These books whispered. I mean that literally. Every book hummed with voices. Quiet ones, murmuring names, dates, secrets, broken promises. I passed a red, bound volume that whimpered the sound of a child crying. A green one leaked ash. A yellow one opened slightly as I walked by and whispered, I never meant to hit her. I began to understand. These were lives, not stories, not fiction. Real people, real memories, real sins. The library was the archive of the house. Everything it ever took, every forgotten face, buried guilt, twisted truth, it stored here, perfectly preserved and out of reach. And if I'd come down here, then that meant mine was somewhere in this place too. My truth, the missing pieces, the book that was me. I started walking, unsure if there was a direction at all, but the books moved for me, rearranging like a living organism. Some snapped shut, others flipped violently. One screamed a name I didn't recognize, Devon, and then burst into flames without burning. The ashes reformed into another book. The house didn't destroy stories, it rewrote them. And suddenly, I saw her. Rachel, not her real self. This version was carved from memory, perfect. 12 years old. Red hoodie. The gap between her front teeth. The one I couldn't remember a few days ago. She stood near a column of levitating books, holding one close to her chest like it was her diary. Her eyes met mine. You shouldn't be here, she said. Tears filled my eyes. I'm sorry. I never meant to. You're not here to apologize, she said coldly. You're here because you want to feel better. I took a step forward, but the space between us stretched like elastic, pulling her further back. Her face darkened. You want to believe you were a victim too, she continued. But you left me. You chose to leave me. You told yourself I was fine so you could do what you wanted. That's not an accident. I collapsed to my knees. The truth slammed into me. No excuses. No hiding. Just the rawness of the moment. I know, I whispered. I know what I did. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I want to remember. All of it. Even the worst parts. I want to carry it. I don't want to forget anymore. The book she held began to shake, and the library reacted. All around me, books began flapping their covers like wings. Pages tore themselves out, filling the air with snow, like flurries of ink. Voices screamed, cried, begged. Whole lives unspooling like tape around me, whipping against my skin. And then Rachel threw the book at me. It hit my chest with a thud and fell open at my feet. Inside was everything. Every moment I'd buried. Every lie I told myself to avoid the truth. Me, walking away from the lake. Me, ignoring her voice as she called for help. Me, watching cartoons later that night, pretending the world hadn't changed. But at the end of the book, one final page. Blank. I looked up at her. What is this? She didn't answer. Because she was gone. Vanished along with the memory shape of her. And then came the sound. Fire. Not literal, but something like it. A roar from deep below that shook the entire library. Books began to burn. Not all, just some. The ones too dangerous. The ones that threatened the house's design. The ones not allowed to be remembered. Mine started smoldering. I grabbed it, clutched it to my chest.
You won't take this!
I screamed.
I earned this!
And then came a voice, low, female, ageless. You don't get to decide what survives. We do. I turned to see her. Not Rachel, not the scribes, the author. The one who lived in the house's marrow. She had no eyes, only pits that leaked words. Her dress was made of pages, torn and stitched, blood forming the ink. Her hands held pens like knives, dripping with black. She didn't walk. She glided, and behind her trailed a cloak of silence, so heavy it crushed the sound from the air itself. She raised a hand. My book levitated. I fought it, screamed, held tighter. But the house was stronger. You are not a story, she said. You are a correction. And then she stabbed the air with her pen. The book burst into flame. I screamed. And then I remembered something I wasn't supposed to. Not about Rachel. About the house, the first time I saw it. It wasn't when we moved in. It was in a dream, long before. I'd drawn it. In crayon. A white house, a black door, and me standing in front of it. I wasn't the first to open the door. I was made to. I was written to. And now, the book burning in front of me wasn't my story anymore. It was hers, the author's, and I was the final chapter. I turned, ran, book still in hand, half burning, half miraculous, and the library opened a path, howling as I moved. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get out before she rewrote me into nothing. I dove into the void and landed in my kitchen. Screaming, covered in ash, the house was quiet, too quiet, but the door behind me, still open, still waiting, and the burning book, still in my hands. The kitchen floor was cold beneath me, cold in a way that didn't belong to anything living. My palms sizzled where they gripped the half-burned book. The charred edges whispering smoke into the air like a dying breath. The flames were gone, but the heat remained, sunk deep into the paper, into my skin, into something older. I was back, somehow, spat out from the library like a rejected manuscript, a draft too dangerous to file away. My head throbbed, not from pain, but from weight. I could feel the pages now, even the ones I hadn't written. Memories I'd never lived flickering through my mind, like dreams I forgot to forget. I was inside a story, but it wasn't mine. It never had been. The kitchen lights flickered once and died, leaving me in the dark. Not pitch dark, just house dark. The kind of darkness that hums, that pulses, that moves when you don't. And all around me, the air thickened again, like the walls were holding their breath. The door to the basement still stood open. Of course it did. It always would now. The house had no reason to hide it anymore. I tried to stand, but the weight of the book made my legs feel wrong, like they weren't mine. Like I'd borrowed someone else's body and it hadn't quite settled into me yet. I stumbled to the counter, hands slipping in something wet. Water, or not water. My palm came away red. Not blood, not paint. Ink. It was leaking from the walls, dripping in slow lines down the cabinets, pooling at the corners of the floor like it had veins. The house was bleeding story, hemorrhaging fiction. Everything was collapsing now. Because I had done the one thing I wasn't supposed to do, I took the story back. The book pulsed in my hands. It no longer felt like paper. It breathed. I could feel it twitch with each thought I had, responding like it knew me better than I knew myself. I opened it. Half the pages were still blank. Waiting. The house wanted me to fill them, but not with truth. With the right version. The clean version. The story that left out Rachel. That polished away the lake, the guilt, the door. That ended quietly in a fixed-up house, happily flipped, happily sold. A story with a prophet. With closure. But I had no closure. I turned to the last burned page and found a line I hadn't written. Tell it right, or not at all. Her voice again. The author's. Still lingering, etched into the ashes like a threat, like a promise. I stared at the basement door. Something inside it moved. Not loud, not aggressive, just a shift. A rustle. Like someone adjusting their seat before the performance starts. I knew then the house wasn't going to chase me anymore. It didn't have to. Because it knew I'd go willingly. Because I had the book now. And the moment I opened it, I became part of its structure. The new draft was in my hands, and every second I hesitated, it rewrote me just a little more. I could already feel it, details slipping again. My old car, my favorite song, the look on Rachel's face when she beat me at Mario Kart. Gone, blurred, not erased, but blurred. Like the house hadn't decided yet if they were allowed to exist. I took a breath and went back to the door. The stairwell was longer than before. Now it twisted downward, not just into the basement, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere beneath memory. The walls wept ink. The steps whispered words with every footfall, some familiar, some not. She left you. You deserved it. You are the reason she drowned. I kept walking. Because no matter how many times they said it, it wasn't news. I'd lived with that truth longer than the house had. At the bottom, the basement was wrong, not just dark, distorted. The shape of it flexed like a heartbeat, as though the space was breathing around me. The washing machine in the corner spun slowly on its own. The shelves held objects from other lives. Rachel's red hoodie, my childhood baseball glove, a broken walkie-talkie, things I hadn't seen in decades, things I thought I'd thrown away. Each item whispered. Not words, memories. When I picked up the glove, I heard my father say, "You'll never catch a damn thing if you keep closing your eyes." When I touched the walkie-talkie, I heard Rachel's voice copy. Are there ghosts in the garden? Over. The room knew me. But I wasn't alone. She was waiting, not the author. Rachel. Not the memory. Not the ghost. The real one. She sat in the far corner, legs crossed, hands resting on her lap. No tears. No accusation in her face. Just quiet. You brought it back, she said softly. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her I just wanted to forget, that I didn't know what would happen. But the book in my hands heated, as if it would burn me for lying again. So I nodded. I did. She stood and walked to me, no more than 12 years old, but taller somehow. Larger than life. Not as a child, but as a weight. As everything I had buried. You think you're brave now, she said, because you're remembering. But you're not here to make it right. You're here to end it. I shook my head. I want to tell it true. She leaned in close. Her breath smelled like lake water and regret. Then write it, every ugly word, and make sure they hear it. The ground trembled. The house groaned like a throat choking back a scream. Rachel pressed her hand to my chest. My heart stuttered. And then she whispered, "Or the next one it eats will be worse than you." The floor split beneath me, and I fell. Through pages, endless pages, blank, burned, scribbled, erased. Falling through the house's chapters like a loose idea, tumbling through fiction and memory until I slammed into the living room. Back where it started, morning light glowed through the windows. The walls were clean. The furniture was new. A smell of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. The door was gone. So was Rachel. But the book still sat in my lap. Only now it was full. Every page written, every truth carved into ink. And across the final page, in my own handwriting, she was real. I let her die. This house helped me forget. But I remember now. I remember everything. The words didn't burn this time. The house stayed still. No creaks. No shifting walls. No whispers. I walked to the door, turned the knob, and sunlight hit my face for the first time in what felt like centuries. The street was quiet. Cars rolled by. Sprinklers ticked in neighboring yards. Elderglen looked normal again, like it had never swallowed anyone. But I knew better, and so did the book. Because as I stepped outside, the final page turned on its own, and a new line appeared. Chapter 2. I didn't run. I should have. That's what you expect from a person who's just escaped a house that eats memory and rewrites lives. Right? But I didn't. I just stood there, on the front lawn, blinking into the morning light like it might blind me. The sun was warm. Birds chirped. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Real ones. The kind that used to mean safety. But after what I'd seen, After the library, the scribes, Rachel, the author, I knew better. The world hadn't returned to normal. I'd simply surfaced, for now. The house behind me stood still. No groaning, no shifting shadows, no trick walls or infinite hallways. Just white siding, clean windows, a porch with a welcome mat that read "Home Sweet Home." It was pretending again. But I wasn't fooled. I still held the book in my hands. Closed now. Heavy. Still warm, like it didn't want to be put down. Like it couldn't be. I didn't know if the house had let me go because it was finished or because it had learned something. Something about me, about memory, about what happens when the truth gets out. But the sun hadn't dimmed, the street hadn't twisted into some nightmare fold, and the neighbors' cars still sat peacefully in their driveways. That's when I noticed the house next door. It was almost identical to mine. Same design, same trim, same damned swing hanging from the same exact tree. A little too same. The kind of sameness that prickles the skin, because your brain knows the world isn't supposed to copy and paste itself like that. But this wasn't just a mirror image. It was worse. There were boxes on the lawn, a moving truck out front, and a man, maybe in his early 30s, carrying a lamp up the porch steps, smiling as he spoke to a woman behind him. She laughed. Their daughter followed, maybe 7 years old, dragging a stuffed animal by one paw. A bunny, almost identical to the one Emma clutched in the photo I found. My knees buckled slightly. They were moving in. I wanted to shout. Run across the lawn. Warn them. Slam the book into their hands and scream, "Don't open any doors, you don't remember being there." But the words stuck in my throat. Because what would I say? How do you explain something like this? They'd think I was insane. Worse, I'd sound like one of them. One of the ones who never left the house. I gripped the book tighter. My story was done, for now, but theirs hadn't even begun. The house had a new draft ready, new characters, a new sacrifice, and it was hungry again. It always was. Maybe it had learned that letting one person escape made for a more powerful legend. Someone to carry the fear forward. Someone to validate what came next. Maybe I wasn't the ending. Maybe I was just promotion. I watched them disappear inside. The front door clicked shut behind them. That was it. Quiet again, no screams, no flickering lights, just normalcy. And then I saw the window curtain shift. Someone, or something, was already watching them. The girl reappeared briefly at the window. She pressed her palm to the glass. Her eyes were wide, curious. But there was something else in them, too. Something too old for a child. She looked past me, like she was looking through time, through memory, like she recognized me, and in that instant I knew. It had already begun. The house next door wasn't just another trap. It was the same one. Or maybe the house was never about the wood and walls at all. Maybe the house was an idea, a story, and once you know it, once you've read even a single page, it can move, it spreads, it waits for cracks in the mind, for guilt, for grief, for someone to whisper, "Please, just let me forget." I took one step toward their lawn, and the girl at the window smiled. No stitches, no buttons, just a knowing, eerie calm. Then she disappeared. The book in my hand snapped open. Pages flipped on their own, one after another, faster and faster, until they stopped on a new page. Blank. Save for one sentence, "They won't listen to you." Beneath it, a second line began to appear, slowly, letter by letter, as if being typed. "But she will." I felt it before I understood it. Not pain, not fear. A presence behind me. I turned. Rachel stood at the edge of the street, barefoot, dressed in the same red hoodie she drowned in. Her hair clung to her cheeks like she'd just emerged from water. Her eyes no longer held accusation, not even sorrow, only purpose. "You're not finished," she said. "You're just the first draft." The world tilted slightly. The lawn shimmered. The book in my hands began to disintegrate. Letters peeled from the pages and floated into the air, circling around me like fireflies. They weren't vanishing, they were moving, flying into her. into Rachel. She absorbed them one by one, her body glowing faintly with every name. Every truth, every unspeakable thing I'd written. You made it real, she said. I dropped the book, or tried to. It wouldn't leave my hands. She stepped forward and placed her fingers over mine. Now let me write the next part. And then she vanished. So did the book. I stood there, empty-handed, empty-minded. No object to clutch. No pages to burn. But the weight was still there, in my head, in my chest. The house had written its story through me, and Rachel was taking it somewhere else. Maybe to finish it. Maybe to start it all over again. Behind me, my own house, the original, creaked once, just once. A warning, or maybe applause. Because as I looked back at the house next door, I saw the front door swing open, and the girl, the one with the bunny, stood there, staring at me, smiling. And from inside the house, a faint sound drifted out, typing. The girl didn't stop staring. She stood in the doorway of the house next door. My house, her house, its house, with that same unnerving stillness I'd seen before. No movement, no twitch, no fidgeting like a real child might do. Just wide eyes, slight smile, and the silence of something ancient wearing a young face. Her bunny hung from her hand by one ear, dragging along the floor like it had given up fighting a long time ago. Behind her, the open door yawned wider, and though the morning sun still shone across the neighborhood, no light touched the inside of that house. It swallowed light. It always had. I took a step forward. Maybe I thought I could still help. Maybe I thought I could warn her, pull her away before it began. But with each step I took toward her, she didn't flinch. She only tilted her head slightly, like a crow appraising something shiny but useless. I stopped at the edge of her lawn, heart beating like I'd crossed a fault line. I didn't say anything yet. I couldn't, because the moment I opened my mouth, I felt it again. The presence, not the scribes, not the author, something older, something deeper. It pressed against my skin like a second atmosphere, not heavy, not cruel, just inevitable, like gravity, like drowning. You could resist it, but only for so long. From behind the girl, her mother appeared. She looked normal, tired maybe, dust on her jeans, a paint smear across her forearm, the kind of domestic chaos that comes with moving into a new home. She smiled at me like I was just another neighbor. "Hey," she called, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sorry, did you say something?" I hadn't. I was frozen. But my mouth moved anyway. "You should leave." She blinked. "Sorry. You should leave," I said again, louder now. "That house, so it's not safe. You need to get out before it's too late." Her expression didn't change. That was the worst part. Not confusion, not concern, just polite disinterest. The kind of face you make when someone hands you a flyer you'll never read. "Okay," she said slowly, nodding like you do to crazy people in public. "We're good, thanks." She stepped inside. The door closed. The girl didn't move. I stood there until my legs went numb. Eventually, I walked back to my own house, or what was left of it. The structure still stood, quiet, waiting, but it no longer felt like it belonged to me. I didn't even go inside. Instead, I sat on the porch steps and stared at the bookless space in my hands, trying to make sense of the emptiness. The story wasn't mine anymore. That much I knew. I'd passed it along, whether I meant to or not. Rachel had taken it, carried it, and now she was writing something new. I just didn't know where it led. That night, I dreamed of the library again, but it was burning, not in chaos and order. Flames curled up the spines of books in precise sequence, shelf by shelf. No screaming pages, no desperate voices, just clean, methodical destruction. And at the center of it all stood Rachel, older now, maybe 16, maybe 30, hard to tell. She held a quill in one hand and a match in the other. She looked at me across the burning void and said only, "You wrote the lie." "I write the truth." I wanted to ask what that meant, if she was fixing things, if she was destroying them, but I woke up before I could speak. The next morning, the neighborhood changed. It was subtle, the kind of difference you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. But I was. One house down, a for sale sign disappeared. A cult D sack that used to be empty now had a new home halfway built. But no construction crew had been there. And across the street, the Andersons, people I'd grown up with, were suddenly just gone. No moving truck, no goodbye, no memory. I asked a neighbor. They looked at me like I'd made the name up. The house was spreading, or maybe the story was. I spent the next few days drifting, not eating, barely sleeping, trying to write something, anything, to put a wall between me and what was happening. But no pen worked, no screen stayed on. My words evaporated the moment they formed, because the house, the story, had taken them. I wasn't a narrator anymore. I was a footnote. One night, I heard laughter, not cruel, not ghostly, just playful. I crept to the window and looked at the house next door. Lights flickered in the upstairs room. The girl ran past the window once, then again, bunny in tow, chasing something I couldn't see. Her silhouette was full of joy. But behind her, just for a moment, a second shadow flickered. Not Rachel, something taller, thin, its fingers scraping the walls. The light went out. I thought about burning the house down. I really did. I even bought gasoline, matches, a crowbar to smash the windows. But the moment I touched the fence post between our yards, the air thickened again. The book may have been gone, but the house still remembered me, and if I pushed too hard, I knew what would happen. It wouldn't kill me. It would reclaim me. So I waited. And then, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, no stamp, no address, just a single envelope slipped through my mail slot. Inside one page, typed, "You still remember. That makes you dangerous, but also useful. The story needs editors. Are you ready?" No name, no signature, just a wax seal at the bottom. I circle. A door. I sat with that letter for hours. What did it mean? Was this Rachel? Was she asking me to help? Or warning me? Or was it the author again, writing her way back into my mind, dragging me deeper with every sentence? That night, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at my reflection, and I whispered, "I want to remember." The lights flickered. A shadow behind me grinned, and the typewriters began again. Click, clack, clack. The typewriters started slow, not the frenzied rhythm I remembered from the library, where keys slammed like teeth and every sentence felt carved into bone. No, this was slower, measured, deliberate, like someone thinking between words, like they were deciding what to make me next. I sat still in the living room, the letter in my lap, the wax seal unbroken, but it was already too late. The moment I'd whispered, "I want to remember," the story resumed. I'd given it permission. Or maybe that was just what it wanted me to think. Maybe there was never a choice at all. The walls around me pulsed again, faint, like a heartbeat in the drywall. Not enough to rattle picture frames, but enough to remind me the house wasn't dead. It never was. It was reading me. And not with eyes, with memory. It knew where I paused. It knew what pages I skipped. And now it had turned to a new chapter. I just hadn't seen the title yet. I stood up, fingers trembling, and turned the envelope over. The seal, the symbol wasn't unfamiliar. I'd seen it before. Burned into the corner of the desk in the attic. Scratched into the floorboards near the basement door. Even once, in a dream I didn't realize was a memory, drawn on the back of Rachel's hand in crayon. A circle, intersected by a vertical line. Not a cross. Not a door exactly. A hinge. Something meant to open. The paper crackled as I broke the wax. Inside a second note. Shorter. Just 2 words. "Come downstairs." Not signed. Not explained. But the moment I read it, the trapdoor opened again. Not the basement door. The trapdoor. The one that didn't exist until it wanted to. The one that had thrown me into the library before. But this time, it didn't drop me into fire or pages or the stitched eyes of memory ghosts. It opened into a room I hadn't seen before. A room I think the house had been saving. The redrafting room. It was plain at first glance. Bare walls. Gray desk, one chair in the center, a typewriter waiting on the table like it had been expecting me. The smell was unmistakable. Old ink, scorched paper, sweat, and something else. Something that smelled like forgetting. The walls, though, those were wrong. They moved, not visually, not with cracks or moaning, but I could feel them inching closer. Not to trap me, to listen. Every thought I had seemed to echo off them, bouncing back into my own skull with just enough delay to feel foreign. I stepped toward the desk. The chair pulled itself back. I sat. The typewriter stared back. It didn't need power. Its keys gleamed faintly in the low, sickly yellow light overhead, and above the platen was a single sheet of paper. Blank, until I touched the keys. You remember Rachel? The machine typed without my help. I didn't press a thing. The keys moved on their own, answering thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. Yes, I thought. You know what you did? I nodded. Then, help us rewrite it. My breath caught. Rewrite? Was that what this was? Was that what the author had done? Taken stories of guilt and trauma and rewritten them until they became fictions she could feast on? No. Not just fiction. Script. Stories with perfect arcs. Pain, climax, transformation. Closure. But real life doesn't end in closure. Not when people drown. Not when you walk away. And not when you spend years trying not to remember. So I reached out and typed 3 words of my own, I won't lie. The keys paused. The light dimmed. Then the walls groaned, louder this time, like the house didn't like that answer. And then the door appeared. Not the front door. Not the basement door. The editorial door. A steel vault embedded in the far wall, humming faintly like something was sealed inside. I stood up, approached. The closer I got, the more I felt the pull. Like gravity was stronger here. The kind of pull that exists in places where decisions stick, where stories end, or begin. My hand touched the wheel. It spun freely. No lock, just choice. I turned it. The door opened, and inside, shelves, hundreds of them. Each shelf filled not with books, but with drafts of lives. Each one stamped with a name. Emma Harris, Devon Moore, Tanya Bright, Rachel, me. I pulled my own draft from the shelf. It was heavier than I expected, dog-eared, smudged. Half of it was typed. The other half written in something that looked too red to be ink. I flipped to the end. The last page wasn't blank. It was a contract. To live, you must forget. To forget, you must feed. To feed, you must open the door. Underneath, a signature. Mine, or something that looked like it. I stared at it, heart thudding like thunder in my throat. I didn't remember signing it, but my handwriting was there. My name, my guilt, pressed into the paper like bloodstains. I set it down, and picked up Rachel's. I expected rage, pain. But what I found was worse. Edits. Whole pages cut out. Moments we shared, erased. Memories turned into twisted metaphors. She wasn't a girl who died in a lake. She was a metaphor for loss, for guilt. They'd rewritten her into a plot device. The house didn't just feed on truth. It reshaped it into something palatable. I heard footsteps. I turned. Rachel stood in the doorway, older again, eyes dark, not angry, resolute. You see now, she said. They turned me into a lesson. I nodded, and me into a warning. She stepped forward, took her draft from my hands, and tore it down the spine. The house screamed, not in sound, in vibration, in atmosphere, in memory. The lights shattered, the walls bled paragraphs. But Rachel stood tall and held out her hand. Let's write a new one, she said. I took her hand, and the typewriter behind us began again. But this time it waited for us. No autopilot, no possession. Only the keys beneath our fingers. We sat, we wrote, and the house shook. Pages turned to ash, rooms collapsed. The ink on the walls dissolved into smoke, and the scribes below, they began to burn. Because once a story is true, it cannot be rewritten. The house screamed for 3 days straight. Not in words, not in language anyone could translate, but in the way a thing that knows it's dying makes noise. Like walls gasping, like floorboards choking on their own rot, like old nails being yanked out of the bones of the place by unseen hands. We stayed in the red drafting room through it all, Rachel and I, our fingers blistering on the keys. We didn't sleep. We barely breathed. Every sentence we typed pushed the house further into the pit it came from. Every paragraph carved something back out of the lies it had laid over us like ash. The story we were writing wasn't elegant. It wasn't clean. It was jagged raw, full of guilt and dirt and tears. But it was ours. The house had built itself out of memory and silence. It survived by feeding on regret and leaving behind narratives people could carry without screaming. It made their pain digestible. A little girl goes missing. A boy loses his sister. A family falls apart because they're haunted, all dressed up with just enough mystique to make them fascinating, tragic, entertaining. But underneath all of that, under the metaphors, under the redrafted fiction, it had buried the truth. And now we were unearthing it, line by line. It fought us harder with each word. Rooms collapsed and reformed mid-sentence. Hallways looped until time made no sense. The typewriter would jam randomly, keys snapping up to slice our fingers if we paused too long. And the redrafting room. It changed every hour. One moment it was a sterile office. The next, it was my childhood bedroom, walls papered with crayon drawings I hadn't made in 20 years. It tried everything. Distraction. Nostalgia. Guilt. It tried Rachel. There was a moment, somewhere around page 221, when I looked up and she wasn't beside me anymore. Just her chair, spinning slowly. I called out. Nothing. I waited. Still nothing. Then the lights died, and I heard her scream. It wasn't the scream from the lake. It wasn't the scream from the attic or the library. This was now. Real. Close. I ran. The house bent around me as I moved, walls tightening, doors closing inches from my face, staircases melting into ramps. I shouted her name over and over. When I found her, she was inside the same mirror I had seen back on day one. The cracked one. She was inside it, on the other side of the glass, pounding against it. Her face warped, lips mouthing words I couldn't hear, and something else was with her. A shadow. Tall, thin, the author. Her face had returned, and it wore every story we'd ever failed to finish. Her skin was stitched from metaphors. Her eyes were quotation marks, and her mouth, still sealed with that needle, thin grin, began to open. Not with words, with pages. They poured out of her throat in endless folds, all of them covered in Rachel's face, not drawn, not described, pressed, like someone had printed her into the pages, flattened her, converted her into a character again. I lost it. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, maybe, or a chair leg, and I smashed the mirror. It didn't crack. Not even a tremble. The glass pulsed under my hands like a living thing. It wanted to keep her. But something else happened. The story we'd been writing in the redrafting room, it came alive. I didn't see it, but I felt it. Words began to bloom on the walls around me. Truths. I left her. She trusted me. I ran because I couldn't face myself. They weren't written in ink. They were burned into the wood. I said them aloud, over and over, and the mirror began to bleed. Thick ink poured from the corners of the frame, hissing against the floor. Cracks spidered outward like ice forming on glass. And then, with a sound like a scream being pulled backwards, Rachel fell through, onto the floor, alive, ice wild, but whole. She looked at me like she wanted to hate me, but couldn't. I told you, she said, breathless, they don't want the truth. They want the version that sells. I helped her up. We limped back to the redrafting room. The typewriter was gone. In its place, a door, simple, wooden, no handle, just a slot near the bottom, like for mail. Inside the slot was a note. Rachel, read it aloud. You've written the truth. Now give it away. I looked at her. Give it to who? But she didn't answer. She just reached into her coat, pulled out a copy of the draft, our draft, and slid it through the slot. The door shuttered, then vanished. And just like that, the redrafting room unraveled. The walls didn't collapse, they peeled. Reality opened at the seams, and beyond it, I saw other houses. Thousands. No streets, no sky. Just houses, some half-built, some decayed, some glowing with stories mid-birth. Every one of them connected, not physically, narratively. This wasn't a house. This was a network, a system of suffering. Each house a node, a book, a chapter. All of them part of something bigger. And now that we'd written the truth, it was infecting the rest. Pages fluttered open in distant windows. Typewriters burst into flame. Front doors slammed and locked. The house network had turned against itself because we'd introduced something it couldn't process, an ending it didn't approve. I turned to Rachel. We should run. But she shook her head. Where would we go? Every door is one of them. So what then? She pointed behind me. Another door, small, barely noticeable. One word etched into the wood: eat it. I go through first, she said. I grabbed her hand. No, together. We opened it. And the moment we stepped through, I understood we weren't escaping the story. We were becoming it. The world behind the door was quiet. No screams, no flickering lights, no twisted corridors echoing with forgotten memories. Just a hallway, perfectly white, too clean, humming with fluorescent overheads that buzzed like impatient bees. The walls were blank, sterile, featureless. There were no pictures, no marks, no signs of time. Rachel and I stood there, side by side, not speaking. It felt wrong to speak. Like we'd stepped into the part of a book where the narrator had gone silent, and the formatting hadn't caught up. The only thing ahead of us was a desk. Simple. Steel. Behind it sat a man in a gray suit. He didn't look up as we approached. He just typed. Slowly, mechanically. A manual typewriter sat in front of him, ink ribbon worn to threads, the clack of each key echoing through the hallway like a hammer hitting bone. We didn't know what he was writing, and somehow I didn't want to know. Rachel reached out, placed a hand on my arm. Wait, she whispered. The man stopped typing. His hand hovered over the keys. Then, without looking at us, he said, "Most people never make it this far." His voice was quiet, calm. So neutral it made my skin crawl. They get rewritten, eaten, lost in metaphor. Most don't even realize they're part of something bigger. Rachel took a step forward. "What is this place?" He looked up. His face was forgettable. That was the strangest part. Not unsettling, not monstrous, just blank. Like he'd been designed to be forgotten the moment you stopped looking at him. "This is where stories go when they try to change themselves," he said. "This is the edit." He gestured around us. The hallway pulsed gently now, like a living thing just under sedation. "You crossed the threshold," he continued. "You wrote your own ending. You challenged the author." "Because she lied," I said, feeling my voice harden. "No," he replied. "She curated." The words sat in the air like a tumor. She chose the versions that resonated, the ones that fit, the ones that kept the house fed and the cycle turning. She erased Rachel, I snapped. He raised an eyebrow. She reshaped Rachel, he corrected, into something palatable, something you could carry without choking. That's what you all ask for, in the end. A story that makes pain feel like progress, even if it's fake. He stood slowly. The typewriter dissolved into the desk like it had never been there. And then he walked toward us, hands folded behind his back. "You wanted to remember. You wanted to write truth. But here's the question, does truth matter if no one reads it?" Rachel stepped forward. Her voice didn't waver. "Then make them read it." He smiled, soft, pitying, and said, "Then you become part of the house." We didn't speak, because deep down we knew what he meant. All those houses, all those stories, each one a doorway to someone else's pain, someone else's silence. The network was a tapestry of guilt, and if we injected truth into it, we weren't escaping. We were infecting it. "We're not going back," I said. Rachel nodded. "We're going forward." The man gave a slight bow, then stepped aside, and behind him, the hallway split. Dozens of paths, each with a label, some familiar, some horrifying. The father who disappeared, the child who spoke to walls, the wife who forgot her name, the room that grew teeth, the girl who remembered too much. Stories. Not metaphorical ones, living ones, waiting for endings, waiting for rewrites. Choose one, the man said. But know this, once you step in, you don't get to be a person anymore. You become a draft. I looked at Rachel. She looked at me, and we both understood. We weren't going to burn the house down. We were going to rewrite it from the inside. Not in one swoop, not with fire or violence, but word by word, memory by memory, until it couldn't lie anymore. I pointed to the one labeled the boy who lost his reflection. Rachel pointed to the silence in apartment 50C. The man nodded once. Then go, he said. And we did. The moment I stepped into my chosen door, the world tilted. Not like falling, but sliding, like being poured into someone else's life. I blinked. I was in a different house. Smaller. Dimmer. A boy sat in front of a mirror, touching his face, confused by the absence of his reflection. And I remembered. I wasn't me anymore. I was his narrator, his witness, his editor. And in another house, somewhere else, Rachel whispered truth into the walls of apartment 5C. The network pulsed. The house felt it, and somewhere in the marrow of its foundation. The author stirred. She wasn't angry. She was curious. Because for the first time in centuries, she didn't know what would happen next. She watched us. Not from a window, not through a mirror, not from the cracks in the wall or the curl of the paper as it burned. The author didn't need those anymore. She watched through story, through the lines we bled onto the pages of her machine. Every word Rachel whispered into apartment 50C, every sentence I carved into the life of the boy without a reflection, they reached her. Not as whispers, but as ruptures, fractures in the perfect spiral she had created. She wasn't furious. Not yet. What she felt was worse. She was intrigued. You see, the author hadn't been questioned in a long time. Not truly. The ones who resisted usually burned fast, screamed once, refused to forget, and were swallowed whole. Their pages were ripped out, turned to ash, and rewritten with smoother curves and cleaner pain. But we hadn't fought. Not in the traditional way. We had rewritten ourselves, told the truth and forced it to stick. We didn't run from the story. We stayed inside and poisoned it with memory. And now she had a new character, herself. Because what kind of writer lives without doubt? What kind of story survives without change? She sat in her chair, deep in the center of whatever realm had birthed the house and all its connected echoes. Her desk was no longer clean. Pages spilled onto the floor like petals from dead flowers. Her quill hovered above her manuscript, ink shaking with hesitation. For the first time, she didn't know what to write next. She could feel Rachel, not just her voice, but her presence, a signature that refused to fade. The girl had once been a metaphor, a cautionary subplot, a body in the water, weighed down by another's guilt. Now she was a narrator. That hadn't been in the plan, and I had once been a perfect feeder, guilt-stricken, desperate to forget, mouth open for lies. But I remembered. I had chosen to keep the weight of it, to stop pretending, and that made me unpredictable. The author didn't hate us for it. No, she admired us. She flipped back through our pages and read every truth with a little smile curving the edges of her ink-stained mouth. Then, without a word, she leaned over her manuscript, tore out the final chapter, and fed it into the fire beside her. Ash danced in the air like moths. She began again, but this time she bled a little into the ink. In apartment 50C, Rachel sat in the hallway, listening to the walls whisper lies to a woman who had forgotten her own name. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She whispered back, "No, your name was Delilah. Your husband's was Carl. He didn't leave you. He died in the red car on June 17th. You were wearing a yellow dress when they told you." You screamed once. Then you forgot. The walls paused, their lies twisted into questions. "Who told you that?" And Rachel smiled. "You did. Before someone edited you. In the house where I stood. My house now. Not hers." I stared at the boy with no reflection. He was quiet, hands pressed to the mirror, like he could find himself through pressure alone. The house had taken him apart, stolen the parts of him that didn't make sense for the story. Left him blank so it could build something simpler. But I knew what had been removed. You hated what you saw in the mirror, I told him. His eyes flicked up to mine. You told yourself you were ugly, unlovable. You begged to forget. His lip trembled, and the house gave you your wish. He nodded slowly, tears filling eyes that were real, even if the mirror denied them. But wishes, I said, don't end stories. They just delay them. I handed him a pencil. Draw yourself. Not what you were. What you are now. He hesitated, then began to sketch, lines shaky, crooked, but real. The mirror didn't resist, it flickered, twitched, and then began to show him again, flawed, blinking, tear-stained, but there. The house didn't like it. Not at first. But it didn't shut the door either. It watched. Because in her distant tower of ash and ink, the author was beginning to change her mind. What if stories didn't have to follow the same arc? What if characters who remembered were more interesting than those who forgot? What if pain didn't have to be smoothed? What if truth sold too? The house pulsed again, not in warning, in rhythm, a beat, a heartbeat. Something living. We weren't burning the system down anymore. We were rewriting it from within. And each time we spoke a truth, another lie collapsed. Another room rebuilt itself in the image of the one who lived in it. The girl with the bunny from next door. She found a hidden door behind her closet, but instead of a stairwell to darkness, it led to a field. Sun, drenched, with a swing hanging from an old oak tree. Her voice echoed across it, singing a lullaby her grandmother used to hum. The house listened and changed the page. Rachel kept moving from room to room, house to house, apartment to apartment, speaking names, speaking truth. She didn't force it. She reminded people of who they'd been before the edit, and one by one, they woke up. Not all of them survived it. Some had let go for too long. Some couldn't stand to remember what they'd buried. They screamed until their pages turned to ash. But even that was better than being a blank, and the author took note. She began adding footnotes. Tiny lines at the bottom of every draft, memory retained, character aware, ending subject to change. The typewriters didn't scream anymore. They waited, because now they weren't writing over people. They were waiting for us to finish the story. And in one final room, the attic of the first house, the one that started everything, a new door appeared. This one wasn't metal. It wasn't pulsing or dark or slick with rot. It was wood, carved. And on it were 3 words, "Truth lives here." No handle, just a peephole. I looked through it and saw the author, alone writing, but not in ink anymore. She was using blood, her blood. She looked up at me and smiled. Like she'd just realized she was a character too. The door didn't open. It didn't need to. I stood with my eye pressed to the peephole, breath held, heart slowing, watching the author write in silence with her own blood. Not frantic, not panicked, intentional. Every stroke of her quill cut another line across her palm. She didn't wince. She didn't flinch. If anything, she looked at peace, and that terrified me more than anything else. This wasn't surrender. This wasn't defeat. This was a pivot, a recalibration. She was rewriting herself, reforming her own arc like a snake chewing through its tail just to be born again. And I understood something in that moment I hadn't before, not fully. We were never fighting a monster, not in the usual sense. We were battling an idea, a system, a story that wanted to control how pain was processed, how grief was packaged. The author wasn't evil. She was inevitable. But inevitability can be questioned. It can be made to hesitate. And that's what we'd done. She met my gaze through the peephole. Didn't speak. Just lifted the quill, touched it to the page again, and scribbled something I couldn't see. Then she nodded, just once, and vanished. Not in smoke, not with a bang. She simply faded from the desk, as though her presence had always been conditional. The door creaked, soft, welcoming, and opened inward. Rachel appeared beside me, blinking like she'd stepped out of a dream, her hands still smeared with ink from apartment 50C, her breath shallow but strong. "She's gone?" she asked. "No," I said. "She's waiting." Inside the room, the light was warm. That, in itself, was strange. No flickering bulbs, no ominous glow from unseen corners. Just a soft amber glow, like late afternoon sunlight through a childhood window. The walls were covered in frames. Hundreds. Some crooked, some straight, each holding a still image that moved when you weren't watching. Memories. Stories. Whole lives captured mid-moment. A woman kissing her child on the forehead before a car crash. A boy dropping his father's hand in a supermarket, never to see him again. A teenager sitting in a tub, the razor blade inches from decision. None of them glamorous, none of them clean, but true. Rachel stepped forward, trailing her fingers along the wall. "They kept all of it," she whispered. "Even the parts people begged to forget." "Because the house never forgets," I said. "It just hides." And suddenly, the frames began to shake. Light shimmered off the glass, and one by one, they started to open, like windows. Each one flung wide into a different world, different time, different grief. I saw my own family, sitting around a dinner table just before the fight that ended everything. I saw Rachel in her bedroom the night before the lake. I saw every moment that had built the foundation of this house, and I saw the lies written over them, the sanitized versions, the poetic pain, the convenient fade to black. I turned to Rachel. "We can't close them." "No," she said, "but we can finish them." And she pulled out a pen. No magic, just a pen. I found one too. Together we stepped into the first window. It was a kitchen, familiar. Faded linoleum, burnt toast smell. My father standing there, mouth open in mid-sentence. I remembered this fight. He told me I was lazy. I told him he never cared. He raised his hand. Then the frame froze, waiting. Rachel looked at me. "Finish it." I stepped forward. And I didn't change it. I didn't edit the strike out of the scene. I didn't soften the words. I added one line. "He cried after he hit you." Because that was true too. He cried when he thought I couldn't hear. The frame accepted the edit. The light dimmed, and the window sealed shut. Not erased, not rewritten, just complete. We moved through dozens more. Rachel stepped into the hospital room where her body had been kept cold and nameless. She walked up to the version of herself on the gurney and whispered, "You weren't a symbol. You were mine." The machines beeped once, then stopped. The scene dissolved, and the house shuddered, not in agony, in relief. We weren't destroying it, we were healing it, or trying to. But there was one window left, taller than the rest, carved in wood, not steel. We stepped through, and found the author waiting. She stood at the edge of a dark ocean, her dress soaked at the hem, pages fluttering around her like feathers from some molting god. She wasn't writing anymore, she was reading. And crying. The pages weren't hers, they were ours. From the redrafting room, from the boy with no reflection, from Delilah in Fike C, from Emma, from the girl with the bunny, from every room that once whispered lies. The author looked at us and smiled, broken, proud. "You made a better ending," she said. "We didn't," Rachel replied. "We just told the real one." The author stepped back into the tide, let the water rise, and vanished beneath the surface. We stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty, it was earned. Behind us, the house creaked. Not with hunger. With breath, it was alive again, but not to feed, to remember. To carry stories the way they were meant to be carried, truthfully, painfully, completely. We walked back through the door, and into the sunlight, and when the house behind us began to close, it didn't seal itself with metal or blood or ink. It closed like a book, finished, not ended. The day we walked out of the house, it blinked. Not literally, no flapping shutters, no slamming doors, but it blinked in the way something ancient and intelligent does when it sees for the first time. A long, slow shudder of awareness. The kind of blink you give not out of sleepiness but out of choice. like the house, after everything, had decided it was tired of watching. The sunlight on our backs wasn't cold anymore. It didn't feel filtered through a lie. It was warm, honest. Honest light. The kind that shows flaws, wrinkles, dust, and truth. The kind that doesn't forgive but also doesn't hide. The house didn't crumble behind us. It didn't collapse into rubble like the stories demand. It didn't implode, or burn, or fall into a pit of convenient darkness. No, it stood still, quiet, its windows no longer glowing with memory or ink or secrets. Just glass now, plain glass. And inside, furniture sat undisturbed, floors unmoving, no whispers, no rooms that shouldn't exist, just walls, real ones. It was over, or at least it had paused. Rachel stood next to me at the edge of the lawn, arms crossed, hair matted from days we couldn't count. She wasn't smiling. Neither was I. There was no triumph in us, just quiet. A shared silence that understood some wars don't end in celebration, only in the absence of screaming. It remembers everything, she said, nodding toward the front door. It always did, I replied. It just didn't know what to do with it. Now, the house knew. It wasn't meant to forget. It wasn't meant to make pain beautiful or rewrite trauma into fables with poetic endings. It was supposed to hold the truth, carry it, honor it, not edit it, and so it blinked. A gesture of humility, a beginning of rest. But as we turned away, ready to leave, the street shifted, just slightly. I saw it in the sidewalk cracks, lines that hadn't been there before, faint but spreading, like veins in old paper. And then I heard it again, not a whisper this time, but a cough, a splintered breath. From another house, 3 doors down. Rachel stopped walking. "What is it?" I asked, already knowing. She turned her head, listening with that instinct she'd earned the hard way. "It's trying again," she said. "Somewhere else." I clenched my fists. "The network." "Not the network," she said slowly. "The pattern. The need." And then it hit me, stories don't die just because one ends. They ripple. They echo. Someone somewhere forgets a name and begs to remember. Someone loses someone and begs to forget. Someone knocks on the door of their own grief and asks it to speak. The house doesn't have to move. It's already everywhere. Not the physical house. Not wood and nails. The idea of it. The idea that if you hide your pain well enough, it will stop hurting. That if you edit your truth, it'll read better. That's the house. That's what it feeds on. Rachel turned toward the sidewalk. "We can't stop it," she said, voice flat. "But we can be there when it opens the next door." I hesitated. "To what?" "Rewrite it all over again." She looked at me then, really looked, eyes full of the weight of what we'd seen. "No. To read it with them. To make sure they're not alone inside." The moment stretched between us like fresh ink, still wet, waiting to be written on. And then we moved, not to run, not to attack, to witness. Because the world is full of quiet houses, quiet grief. People sitting in the attic of their own memories, whispering things they don't think anyone can hear. But they're wrong. Someone always hears. Sometimes it's the house. Sometimes it's the author. And sometimes it's us. We became the footnotes, the editors. The ones who walk through stories not to change them, but to remember them right. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind slides under a doorframe just wrong, and the walls creak like they've just remembered something, we're already there. We sit in the corner. We read what's written. We add a single sentence, "You are not alone in this room," and the house blinks and rests, for now. The next house looked innocent. Maybe that was the worst part. It was the kind of place you drive past without thinking, nestled at the far end of a cull, sack where the trees leaned just a little too perfectly, and the sidewalk cracks seemed artistically placed, not weather-worn. A white house with pale blue shutters, flower boxes beneath the windows, and a yellow bicycle tipped against the porch. The kind of place someone might describe as cozy. The kind of place you might want to forget your pain in. Which meant it was exactly the kind of place the story loved. Rachel and I stood at the edge of the driveway, silent, not because we didn't know what to say, but because the air was already speaking, not in words, but in tone. Thick, too still. The kind of stillness that follows an argument, or a scream, or the moment right after a door is locked. The shutters didn't move, though the wind touched everything else. The house was holding its breath and waiting. "This one's awake," Rachel whispered. I nodded. We hadn't spoken much since we left our house. The first house, the one that blinked. There hadn't been a need. There's a kind of language that only exists between people who've walked through mirrors together, who've read each other's unwritten pages. She and I understood what the other carried now, and that was enough. But this house was different. The others had pulsed with hunger, with story. This one, it spoke, not in voices, not at first, but as we stepped up onto the porch, our feet creaked in perfect unison, like the floorboards had been expecting the rhythm. The door opened before we knocked. Inside, everything was blue. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally blue. The walls, the ceiling, the chairs, the table, even the fruit in the bowl, painted over. Bananas dipped in azure acrylic. Apples glowing like sapphire glass. It should have been absurd. It should have been funny. But it wasn't. Because the deeper we stepped in, the quieter the color became. That's the only way to describe it. Quiet color. The kind that sucks emotion out of your chest without asking. The kind that blurs the edges of your memory until you're not sure how long you've been in the room, or whether you meant to come at all. The kind of blue that forgets. Rachel touched the wall. It shivered. "Someone's still inside," she said. "We found her in the upstairs hallway." The blue room was at the end. Door half open, a sliver of light leaking out that didn't flicker, didn't dim, just sat there like a knowing eye. I went in first. The girl sat cross-legged in the center of the floor. 15, maybe 16. Hair in a long braid down her back. Skin pale. Eyes open, but not seeing. Just listening. She didn't look at us. She didn't blink. She was listening to the walls. And they were talking back. "I don't want to be here anymore," she whispered. A pause. Then the wall replied, not in sound, but in vibration. The plaster pulsed ever so slightly, like something alive had just pressed its ear against the other side. Rachel knelt. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The girl didn't answer. Rachel tried again. "Can you hear me?" The girl tilted her head, just a fraction. "I can hear it." I stepped closer. "What's it saying?" The girl finally blinked. "Nothing yet, but it will. It always does when it's ready." Rachel and I exchanged a glance. This wasn't possession. This wasn't a memory trap or a metaphoric grief echo. This was something else. This was a prelude. This girl hadn't been rewritten yet. She was waiting to be. And the house, it was grooming her. "You've been alone in here a long time," I said. She nodded slowly. "How long?" She shrugged. "Time doesn't stick anymore. It slides." Rachel looked around the room. There were no windows, no clock, no mirrors, just books, dozens of them, all the same size. All blank, except for the one she held. It was full. Front to back, written in neat cursive. The same sentence repeated. "If I forget it, it didn't happen." I reached for it. The girl didn't stop me. I read the first few pages. "If I forget it, it didn't happen. If I forget it, it didn't happen. If I forget it, it didn't happen." Page after page, no punctuation, no breaks, no changes in pressure or ink. Like something was writing through her. Rachel stood. "This isn't just memory loss," she said. "This is ritual. She's making an offering," I whispered. The girl looked up, and in her eyes I saw it. The same echo we'd seen in Emma, in the boy, in Delilah. The echo of someone who knows they're being watched. Who knows something waits just on the other side of the wall, with a mouth full of forgiveness and a pen full of edits. "It told me I could rest," she said. Rachel stepped forward, crouched again, reached out. "But you don't want to forget, do you?" The girl didn't answer, but she didn't nod either. Her grip on the book tightened. I knelt beside them. Whatever happened, it matters. Even if it hurts. She whispered then, so low I almost didn't catch it. He did things, and no one believed me. So I told myself maybe if I forgot, it would stop being real. There it was. The cost of forgetting. The lie that makes the pain manageable. The house feeds on those lies. But we'd brought something else. Rachel gently placed her hand over the book. You don't have to keep giving it what it wants. The girl looked at her, lips quivering. I don't know who I am without it. You're someone who survived, I said, and you don't need to be rewritten. You just need to be writ. The walls groaned, not violently, like someone turning in their sleep. The girl stood slowly, let go of the book, and the sentence stopped. The house tensed, waiting, and we waited too. Would it lash out? Would it scream? Would it retaliate? No, it just went silent, fully, for the first time, because she chose not to forget. And the house, it blinked again. The color drained from the walls. Blue peeled away like cheap paint. Underneath was just drywall, beige, boring, honest. The girl, Nina, she told us later, walked down the stairs and out the front door like she hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. Rachel followed, her face unreadable. I lingered, just for a moment. Inside the blue room, the book sat on the floor, untouched. I picked it up. One final sentence had been written. If I remember, I can live with it. I smiled, closed the book, and stepped back into the light. The house didn't close behind me. It left the door open, just in case someone else needed to walk through. To be continued. Part 18 te hal eayt height neer undy. The wind was different this time. Not colder, not louder, but sharp, like it had direction, as if it was pushing us, not just passing through. It chased us down the sidewalk after we left the blue house, pressing at our backs, herding us toward something we hadn't chosen. Yet, that was the trick with these houses. They rarely waited for an invitation. You didn't find them. They found you, when the story inside them had gone on too long without an ending, when the pain had fermented into silence. And this next one, it wasn't just waiting, it was starving. The front door opened before we knocked. No creak, no dramatic gust, just an open rectangle, black and still, as if it had been standing like that for years, and only just now remembered it had guests to greet. Rachel hesitated beside me, her fingers twitching against the seam of her jeans. It's already started, she said. I knew what she meant. Some houses called to you with whispers. Some tried to hide. This one had opened its throat, and something inside was breathing. We stepped in. The door didn't close behind us. It disappeared. Gone in an instant, like it had been cut from the world entirely. Behind us, nothing but blank wall, no doorknob, no hinges. Just white plaster stretching endlessly back. I turned around to find Rachel, but she was already several feet ahead, her face dim in the flickering light of a hallway that seemed to shift, not twist or curve, just extend. Like a hallway that had no business existing in the real world, a hallway that grew every time you blinked. Where are we? I asked. She didn't answer. Her mouth opened, but the words didn't come out. They were stolen, sucked into the walls before they reached my ears. I ran to catch up. We didn't walk down that hallway. We sank. The floor didn't slant, but the further we moved, the heavier the air became, like we were dragging invisible weights behind us. The wallpaper was torn in strips, vertical scars that revealed older walls beneath them, patterns from other decades, memories from other stories. One moment it was floral, then checkerboard, then peeling beige, each layer older, sadder, deeper. Then we heard it, the voice, low, distant, genderless, like someone murmuring underwater. It didn't speak in commands or riddles. It asked one question, over and over. Do you remember what you did? Rachel stopped. The air froze around her. I reached for her shoulder, but her skin was cold, ice beneath her coat. The voice grew louder. Do you remember what you did? Not accusatory, not angry, just curious. And somehow, that made it worse. I didn't do anything, Rachel said. But the hallway disagreed. It pulsed. Lights above us stuttered. And then, like a blink, the hallway changed. We weren't walking anymore. We were standing in a school hallway. Familiar. Too familiar. Rachel's eyes widened. Don't, she whispered. Not this. But the house didn't care. This wasn't about her comfort. It was about her memory. Lockers lined both sides. Old dented. Covered in stickers from bands that hadn't existed in 20 years. And at the far end, a door. Her name was written on it. Not in marker, in blood. Rachel Ashford, room 17, she backed up. No. Rachel, I said, stepping between her and the hallway. We can stop. We can turn around. There's no door behind us, she said quietly. This is the only way through. And she was right. The hallway had collapsed behind us, replaced with black. The kind of black you don't walk through. The kind that swallows you. The door ahead opened with a soft hiss. Inside, a classroom, empty desks. Sunlight frozen in mid beamed through dirty windows. And on the chalkboard, her name again. Under it, a sentence. She lied. Rachel's hands trembled. I didn't, she said. I told the truth. I told them everything. And then, out of nowhere, figures began to appear. Not ghosts, not illusions, witnesses, other kids, teachers, eyes blank, mouths stitched shut. Every one of them facing Rachel, judging without words. She fell to her knees. They didn't believe me, she whispered. He said I made it up, that I wanted attention, that I was sick. The classroom door slammed shut behind us. The voice returned. Do you remember what you did? This time, it wasn't asking if she lied. It was asking if she believed the lie. If, somewhere deep inside, she had begun to think maybe he was right. Rachel sobbed, and for the first time, I saw her break, not out of fear, but from the cruel possibility that maybe she had rewritten herself before the house ever had the chance. And I understood. The hallway didn't rewrite stories, it trapped them. Not by force, by guilt. We had to get out. I pulled her up, held her face in my hands. You told the truth. That's why it hurt. That's why it stuck. That's why it echoes in this place. The stitched, mouthed figures turned to me, eyes glowing, and then the chalkboard changed. A new sentence scrawled across it. She survived. The air changed. The guilt didn't vanish, but it shifted, from shame to memory, from pain to presence. The door opened again, not to another hallway, to a field. Wide, open, wind sweeping over grass. Rachel looked back once. The classroom was fading, like a film strip melting in the projector. She took my hand. We stepped outside. The house blinked. And the hallway behind us collapsed into a single sentence. If you can't forget, then remember right. It should have ended there. The hallway was gone. The field was real. The sky didn't stutter. The wind didn't echo. And there were no hidden voices crawling under the grass. For once the world felt untouched. But even then, standing in that rare peace with Rachel beside me, I knew better. The house doesn't give gifts, not without strings. This wasn't an ending. It was a breath. A heartbeat before something worse. You could feel it in the way the sun hung just a second too long in the sky. The way the birds froze in mid-flight if you stared too long. The air itself had the taste of a trick. Rachel knew it too. Her shoulders had relaxed, but not all the way. Her gaze scanned the horizon like she expected it to ripple or tear. And then, in the distance, a sound broke the stillness. Not a scream, not a voice. A creak, wooden, familiar. We turned toward it in perfect sync, both already knowing before we saw. A door, freestanding. No walls, no hinges. Just a single pale door rising from the middle of the field like it had grown there. It didn't swing open. It swung inward, backward, toward whatever it had once been part of. And behind it, darkness. Not the kind we'd seen in other houses. This one didn't breathe. It listened. Someone's calling us, Rachel said quietly. I nodded. Or remembering us. Because this wasn't the house reaching for us. This was something deeper, something older. We stepped toward the door. And with every step, I felt the world peel back. Not like paint, like skin. The sky trembled, the grass yellowed, the birds dropped mid-flight, vanished before they hit the ground. The illusion around us cracked, not violently, but deliberately, like someone slicing through a painting with surgical care, and then we were back inside. Not the house. Not any house. We were inside a memory, but not ours. The room was familiar. Too familiar. It was the living room from my childhood, but smaller, crooked, like someone had built it from memory without quite remembering how wide the walls were. Toys scattered across the floor, Legos, action figures, an old train track half, buried under a blanket. The couch sat at a tilt, like it had buckled under the weight of too many arguments. And on the far wall, an old TV flickered with static. Rachel stepped carefully beside me. "This is yours," she whispered. "No," I said slowly. "This is someone watching mine." Because the memory wasn't alive. It didn't breathe or react. It played. Like a film loop. Like something being observed from the outside. And on the couch sat a boy, me, younger, holding a glass of milk too tightly. Waiting. Listening. Then came the footsteps, heavy, measured, down the hallway, and suddenly I knew which day this was. "Don't," I whispered, but the door in the memory opened, and he stepped in. My father. Not the edited version from the earlier house. The real one. Tired, angry, already drunk though the sun hadn't set. "Why are we here?" Rachel asked, barely audible. "Because someone's remembering me," I said. "Not as I want to be, but as I was." And then the scene shifted again. Quick, like pages turning too fast to catch. Now we were in another room, a kitchen. A woman screamed. Not mine, another, holding a plate, frozen in mid-shatter, blood on the floor, and a man backing away, hands up, shaking. Different time. Different people. But the story was the same. Pain. Covered. Edited. Spun. Then another room. Another scream. Another rewritten moment. The door hadn't led us to a house. It had led us to echoes. Pages ripped from unfinished drafts. Stories no one had the strength to tell. The door had opened backward, but not into the past. Into the stories that never got written. The ones buried too deep to survive the first edit. And in the center of it all, her. The girl from the blue room. Nina, older now. Or maybe younger. Sitting cross-legged again in the middle of all these fractured rooms, watching them play around her like a carousel of grief. Her eyes snapped to us the moment we saw her. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "We followed the door," Rachel replied. She shook her head. "You followed the memory." "That's different." She stood slowly. And suddenly, she wasn't a girl anymore. She was many. Her body flickered. Dozens of faces behind her eyes. Dozens of names. People who had nearly vanished. All the ones who'd forgotten too well. "I'm the keeper," she said. "The ones they gave up on lived through me. I remember for them. Every scream. Every silence. Every lie that got accepted because it was easier." She took a step toward us. "I am the stories that couldn't be carried." Rachel stepped in front of me. "Why now? Why show us this?" "Because the house changed," she said softly. "You changed it. And now these memories want to come back. But they don't know how." I swallowed hard. "What do they want from us?" "To be finished," she said. "To be read." We stood in silence, surrounded by 1,000 broken rooms. Each pulsing, each asking. And I realized what the backward door really was. It wasn't an entrance. It was an invitation. "Will it hurt?" Rachel asked. Nina didn't smile, but she didn't look away. "Yes," she said. "But it's better than disappearing." We looked at each other. And then we nodded. The stories were waiting. We opened the first book and began to read aloud. The first sentence nearly broke me. It was written in faded pencil, smudged along the edges like the writer's hands had trembled, or maybe like they'd tried to erase it. Failed, and gave up. The paper smelled of mold and something else. Something older than rot. Regret, maybe. I could almost hear the pencil scraping across the page as I read it aloud. He told me I was special. I was 7. That's when the room around us groaned. Not from pain, from remembrance. We had opened a wound. A real one. And wounds like this didn't heal with time. They didn't fade or fester. They waited, silently, for someone to finally stop looking away. Rachel squeezed my hand. She didn't have to say anything. We both felt it. The shift. The backward door hadn't led us into a story. It had led us into the space between stories. The place where memories too dangerous, too unspeakable, were sealed. Where the house, for all its cruelty, had refused to go. Even it had limits. But we didn't. Not anymore. The words on the page: blood, not ink, not blood. Grief. Thick, wordless grief that clung to our tongues as we kept reading. Each sentence a memory. Each paragraph a wound. I didn't scream. Not at first. He said no one would believe me. I stopped using my name. The room shook with each one. Furniture crashed in and out of form. The walls boiled with faces, blurred, screaming, silent. And in the center she sat, the girl, no older than 7, hair matted, knees pulled to her chest. Eyes empty. She didn't look at us. She didn't flinch. She wasn't there for comfort. She was there to be remembered. Rachel crouched beside her. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. The girl blinked once. That was all. Rachel sat, not close, just there. The girl's lips moved, no sound. I leaned in. "What did you say?" She looked at me for the first time. Eyes black, not evil, erased. I asked if I was still real. I almost dropped the book, because it wasn't just her asking. It was every one of them. All the memories that had been smothered under edits and rewrites. All the truths too sharp for easy fiction. All the children, the mothers, the sons, the lovers, the silenced. Each one wondering if, without their story, they were still real at all. "Yes," I said. "You're real." The floor cracked. 100 other children appeared, then women, then men. All shapes, all times. All frozen in their final moments of silence. Some mid-scream. Some hiding in closets. Some just waiting. Each one held a page. I understood then. They didn't need us to read to them. They needed us to read them. To witness what they were never allowed to say out loud. So we did. Rachel took the next page. Read it aloud. He hit me when I told him I didn't love him anymore. The walls flickered. I took another. They buried her under the floor and smiled like she'd moved away. A woman stood straighter. Another page. No one checked the basement. They didn't want to know. A man dropped his shovel, fell to his knees. Each sentence we spoke was an undoing, not of pain, of silence. The house, the story behind it all, began to fight back. I felt it in the air, like a voice clearing its throat, preparing to rewrite again. But it was too late. We had changed the syntax. No more smoothing. No more edits. Every name we spoke anchored someone back into being. Every truth we gave breath to tore a hole in the lie they'd been buried under. The room collapsed into white light, then reshaped into something new. A library, infinite shelves, no order, no labels. But each book pulsed with heat. Because they were alive, they were truth. And the girl, the first one, stood now. Eyes clear. She handed me her page. I was 7. But I was right. Then she stepped back into her book, not trapped. "Home?" Rachel looked at me. Voice cracked. "What are we supposed to do with all of these?" I looked around the endless rows. "We read them," I said. "One by one." I nodded. "And we let them stay as they are. No metaphor, no polish, no chapter titles. Just what happened. Because truth doesn't need fiction to matter. And pain doesn't need a pretty ending to be valid." As we moved between the shelves, each book seemed to light up in recognition. No longer erased. No longer waiting. I felt the story shift around us. Felt the house, wherever it was, twitch in frustration. It had lost control. Not because we burned it down, but because we told it you don't get the last word anymore. We do. The backward door still stood at the edge of the library. We didn't walk through it. Not yet. There were still books to read. Still voices to unbury. Still truths waiting to be remembered. Because somewhere out there, another house had just opened its eyes. And we had more pages to find. It started with the sound of pages turning. Slow, rhythmic, endless. Not from us, but from the shelves themselves. The library was awake now, aware of us, no longer silent. The pages didn't flap like in horror movies. They breathed. Each one exhaled the name of someone who had been forgotten. Or worse, misremembered. Every whisper a correction, every turn a resurrection. The air grew heavy, not with dust or time, but with the weight of untold truths finally given voice. This wasn't a place for fear anymore. This was sacred ground. Rachel was ahead of me, already tracing her fingers along the spines. They didn't have titles, just numbers. Some long, some short, none in order. The shelves went on forever in every direction, like the bones of the house had stretched into infinity. We hadn't stepped into a room. We'd stepped into a reckoning. I pulled a book at random. The cover was soft, worn with fingerprints. It opened on its own. No table of contents. No chapters. Just one sentence scrawled across the first page, over and over, in different handwriting. They said it didn't happen because no one screamed. I read it aloud. The lights flickered. Not out of malice, but reverence. The sentence was heard. Honored, and then it faded gently, the way a held breath slips out. The next page was blank. Waiting, I wrote one line beneath it. But silence is not consent, and the book closed itself. Rachel looked over at me, a new book in her hands. Her lips were trembling, but not from fear. She looked tired. The kind of tired you get when you realize how many broken stories you'll never be able to carry at once. This one says nothing, she whispered, holding it out. I opened it. She was right. Page after page blank. Then, near the center, faint, almost invisible, scratches. Not writing, nail marks, scraped across the parchment as if the story had tried to write itself and failed. Rachel traced them. They died before they could speak, she said. No, I replied. They were interrupted. We held the book together. Didn't write anything this time. Just held it. And the scratches softened. Not erased. Just accepted. Sometimes the truth isn't in what was said. It's in what was taken before it could be told. The shelves shifted around us, parting like a curtain. Another hallway revealed itself, only this one wasn't dark. It was lined with mirrors. Dozens, hundreds, each one reflecting not us, but someone else. Children, old men, mothers. Every reflection held eyes wide with secrets never spoken. I approached the nearest one. A woman sat in a bathtub, knees to chest, tears flowing silently, mouth stitched shut. Behind her, a door ajar. A man's shadow lingering. I touched the glass. It was cold, but the reflection blinked. Alive, watching. And I realized these weren't images. These were waiting rooms. Stories paused at the moment of silence, still hoping someone would listen. Rachel moved beside me, her hand pressed to a mirror showing a boy. 9, alone in a garage, looking at a broken dog collar. The kind of pain no one ever asked him about. This is endless, she said, voice barely above a breath. I nodded. Because we were never supposed to finish it, I replied. That's the lie the house told, she muttered. That pain ends with the story. That once the final page is turned, the weight lifts. She shook her head. It doesn't. And she was right. Some pain doesn't conclude. It simply finds room inside you to settle. These books weren't here to be closed. They were here to exist. To be witnessed. That was the truth we hadn't known when we first stepped into the author's world. That not every story needs an arc. Some just need a listener. We turned back to the shelves, and then the library did something new. It spoke, not in words, in names. Soft, gentle, whispered into the corners of the room, spilling down the aisles like warm air. I heard them. Dozens at first, then hundreds, thousands. Alicia, Devin, Sarah, Jonas, Lena, Trevor, Naomi. Each one carried not just memory but weight. These weren't characters. These were people. People who had been swallowed, flattened, made metaphor, and now they were rising. Rachel turned in a circle, her eyes wide, tears on her cheeks. They're coming back, she said. No, I said. They never left. The house had buried them under tidy endings. Now the library was opening the vault. We spent what felt like hours reading names, holding books, turning pages that had never been seen. Every one of them carried something heavy, sharp, unspeakable. But we didn't flinch. We stayed. We witnessed. And that, more than anything else, was what broke the last lock. From the far end of the aisle, a new door appeared. Not red, not locked. It was wooden, plain, no handle. Just a plaque nailed into the grain. One word. Remembered. Rachel placed her hand on the wood. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "Neither am I," said. "But we don't get to wait." The door didn't open. It allowed. And beyond it, not another house, not a trap, a room. Sunlight streamed in through high windows. Inside, a table, and across from us, the author, older, tired. But she didn't have a pen. She didn't even have a desk. She had a stack of books beside her. Our books, the ones we'd read. She gestured to the chairs. "Sit," she said. "We need to talk." She was smaller than I remembered. Not in height, not in presence, but in weight. The weight of someone who used to carry power and had since put it down. The author sat at the far end of the long wooden table, fingers clasped, eyes not quite meeting ours. There was a stillness to her that didn't feel like calm, but more like guilt forced into posture. On the table sat a pile of books, all blank, their pages unopened, their covers unmarked, ghosts of stories that hadn't been allowed to begin. Beside them a single fountain pen, cracked down the center, leaking black onto the wood like a wound that refused to clot. Rachel sat first. I followed. The author looked at us for the first time in what felt like years. Her eyes held no malice, no trickery, just exhaustion. "You weren't supposed to make it this far," she said softly. Her voice was weathered, like pages turned too often. "We didn't come to finish your story," Rachel said. "We came to stop it from finishing us." The author gave the smallest nod. Her fingers twitched near the broken pen, but she didn't reach for it. "You think I was the villain," she said. "You were," I replied. "You rewrote people. You erased what hurt. You made pretty lies out of honest scars," she exhaled. "I didn't start that way." "No one does," Rachel said. "But you kept going long after you should have stopped." The room around us was bare. No shelves, no windows beyond the narrow skylights. The light here was real, though, unfiltered, and I could finally see the author clearly. Her hands were stained with ink, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, her mouth drawn into the kind of line people wear when they haven't said the right thing in years. "I wanted to help," she said. "They came to me with broken stories, so I softened them, cut out the pain, rounded the edges, made them easier to read. And in doing that, you silenced them," Rachel said. "You replaced truth with comfort." The author winced like the words had slapped her. "I thought if they didn't have to relive it," she murmured, "they could heal." "But you didn't ask," I said. "You decided. You made yourself God of the forgotten." Silence. Long, deep. Then, finally, she leaned back and stared up at the ceiling. I got lost in it. The power of editing grief, turning horror into poetry. At first, it felt merciful. Then it just felt easy. Her voice broke. I stopped reading them. I just wrote what I thought they wanted. Rachel stood, walked to the pen. "Why is it broken?" The author closed her eyes. "Because I tried to write someone out who didn't want to go." And she broke it. "Nina, it had to be." Rachel picked up the pen. Ink dripped slowly, a black thread soaking into the grain. "Is it still usable?" she asked. "No," the author said. "That kind of pen only writes in silence. You've filled this place with too many truths now." I stepped forward. "What happens next?" The author smiled faintly. "Nothing. Or everything. The stories don't need me anymore. They've found their voices again." She pushed the stack of blank books toward us. "Take them," she said. "They're ready." Rachel frowned. "Ready for what?" "To be earned." The author looked at me. "You read them. You didn't rewrite them. You remembered them correctly. That matters more than you know." I opened the first book. Still blank. But I could feel something stir. A heartbeat in the spine. A breath in the binding. The potential of a story that no longer needed permission. Will you stay here? I asked. The author nodded. This is where I belong now. Among the unwritten. It's not punishment. It's penance. Rachel looked back at the door behind us. The light had changed. Soft gold now. The kind that comes at the very end of the day, when the sun's tired and the shadows get longer. She turned to the author one last time. What happens when people stop being afraid to tell their stories? The author's eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. Then I disappear, she said. And that would be the best ending of all. We walked out together. No hallway. No maze. Just a single step into a field of grass that hadn't existed seconds earlier. The house was gone. Not crumbled. Not blinking. Just gone. Rachel held her book to her chest. I held mine too. Neither of us spoke. There was no need. We knew what came next. Not a fight. Not a haunting. Just the long, slow work of reading what was once forbidden. Of holding space for the unspeakable. Of naming what had been silenced. Because the house had taught us something terrible, something true, that the greatest horror isn't being haunted. It's being forgotten. And now we remember. It looked like a hospital at first, white floors, pale walls, long corridors that curled too gently, as if designed to lull rather than lead. But it wasn't the sterile sharpness of a real hospital. There were no blinking lights, no beeping machines, no scent of antiseptic. Instead, there was an unnatural quiet. Not silence. The quiet you get when a room is full, but everyone's been told not to speak. That's how it felt. Like the walls were holding their breath, and the people inside were pretending they didn't exist. It took us a few minutes to realize what was wrong. No one had a name. Not on charts. Not on doors. Not on the thin plastic bracelets cinched around pale wrists. We passed room after room. Person after person, all staring blankly ahead, as if memory had been vacuumed out of their heads, leaving only stillness behind. They weren't restrained. They weren't drugged. They weren't even frightened. That's what made it unbearable. They weren't anything. Rachel stopped beside a man sitting in a wheelchair. His eyes followed us, but his mouth didn't move. No words. No question. No cry for help. She bent slightly, smiled gently. "What's your name?" The man blinked. A flicker of confusion rippled across his brow. Then nothing. He looked away. "I don't think they know they ever had names," I said quietly. Rachel straightened. Her voice had gone brittle. "This isn't a hospital." I nodded. "It's a holding room." But for what? As we walked deeper, the hallways grew narrower, less curated, more raw. Paint peeled from corners. The temperature dropped, and the people changed. They started to whisper. Not words, noises. Syllables, fragments, broken vowels. Like the mouth remembered what the mind didn't. We turned a corner and found a room with a flickering light and a single chair bolted to the center. A woman sat in it, not strapped, not confined. She was holding a book. Closed, it was one of ours. Rachel stepped in first. "Who gave you that?" She asked softly. The woman looked up. Her face was gaunt, eyes hollowed from years of staring at nothing. "It came through the wall," she rasped. "Pages warm." I didn't open it. I was afraid. "Of what?" I asked. "That it would tell me who I was." She looked down at the book again, hands trembling. I stopped wanting to know. Rachel reached for the book. The woman flinched. "No, if I open it, I have to feel it again." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a place for the forgotten. It was where people put themselves when remembering became too much. Not erased. Not rewritten. Just locked away. By choice. By pain. By fear. And the house, whatever remained of it, had carved this new wing for them. A sanctuary made of numbness. Rachel knelt beside the woman, voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to read it all. Just one line." The woman stared. Then slowly, agonizingly slowly, opened the book. Her eyes scanned the first sentence. She gasped. And for the first time in decades, she cried. Not loud, not messy, just a single tear, dragging itself across a face too still for too long. "It was my name," she whispered. I remember my name. What is it? I asked. Her lips trembled. But she couldn't say it. She hadn't practiced it in so long. Rachel took her hand. It's okay. You don't have to say it. It's yours again. That's enough. We stood in silence as she clutched the book to her chest. The lights above us grew warmer. And suddenly, we heard voices in the distance, others whispering. First one, then another, then dozens. Like something had cracked, the sound of names being remembered. Unearthed, whispered like prayers. Ali, not Marcus. Eden. Jared, me. And that last one, that's what stopped us. Me, not a name, a claim. Someone daring to say they were someone. Rachel turned to me. This place wasn't just built by the author. I nodded. It was built by the people who gave up on being known. That's what the house fed on now. Not just pain, but surrender. The moment you decided your voice didn't matter, we walked back through the hallway, and now the people were turning toward us, not speaking. Not yet, but their eyes were alive. As we reached the exit, a nurse appeared. No face. Just a paper mask that read here, "We do not name what hurts." Rachel took the mask and tore it in half. Then it's time to leave. The hallway behind us began to crumble. Not violently, like a skin being shed, and from the pieces, people walked barefoot, clutching books, clutching names. No screaming, no chaos, just the quiet miracle of reclamation, because to be named is to be known, and to be known is to begin again. We stepped into the light with them, and somewhere in the distance, another door creaked open. The house was still watching, but this time, so were we. The door was small, too small, as if whoever built it didn't expect anyone grown to come through. It stood half buried in the base of a crumbling brick wall in the middle of an overgrown playground. One of those quiet places where laughter once lived, but hadn't returned in years. The swings moved without wind. The slide was rusted at its core. We heard the creaking before we even saw the door, not from its hinges, but from beneath it, a sound like wood splintering under too much truth. The others who had come out with us, the ones who'd remembered their names, stayed back. They looked toward this place with something worse than fear recognition. Not everyone gets through that door, one of them warned, voice trembling. It doesn't open for lies. Rachel and I exchanged a look. Then she nodded once and stepped forward. The door didn't wait for her to knock. It opened the moment her fingers brushed its edge, slow, deliberate, patient. And on the other side, nothing. Just a flat white floor and white walls that seemed to lean inward, as if the room had been held in tension for too long and was finally exhaling. There was no furniture, no lights, just clarity. But the moment we both crossed the threshold, the door behind us slammed shut and vanished. No panic, no noise, it just ceased. And then the room spoke. Not in voices, in memories, ours, projected on the walls like oil slick film, blurred at the edges, impossibly detailed in the center. Every moment we'd ever flinched, every word we'd wished we hadn't said, every silence we'd used as armor. The room didn't judge, it just showed. There was Rachel, 17, standing in a mirror, trying on 3 different faces before school. None of them hers. There was me, 8 years old, holding back tears at my father's funeral, too scared to cry because I'd overheard someone say, "He has to be the man now." The scenes didn't hurt in the way we expected. They didn't stab. They peeled, layer by layer, armor by armor, until only the rawest parts of us remained. We weren't just seeing our past, we were confessing it, and the room waited, not for forgiveness, but for honesty. A crack formed in the center of the floor, a narrow, thin break like the first sign of a deeper collapse. Then a voice filled the space. Ours, but not from us. "Why did you lie about who you were?" Rachel didn't move, but her mouth opened. I didn't want to be broken. The wall flickered. Another image. A classroom. Her name on the board again, but this time scribbled over, with slurs, with accusations, with silence that hurt worse than any scream. The voice came again. "And you. It was asking me now. Why I pretended to be fine. Why I smiled through panic. Why I swallowed truth like poison and called it strength. I stepped forward. Because no one taught me what else to do. The room went still. Then the floor split open. Not violently. Surgically. Revealing a staircase. Black stone steps leading down. Into another room. Rachel didn't hesitate this time. Neither did I. At the bottom of the stairs, the walls were covered in writing. Not sentences. Not paragraphs. Confessions. Written in every kind of ink, scratched in with fingernails, burned in soot, painted in blood. These were the things people couldn't say in life. Things they buried. Things they twisted into something softer. We were in the room of the unspoken. A place beneath the story. Beneath even the memories. This was where truth came when it had nowhere left to go. Rachel ran her hand along one of the sentences. It said, "I laughed at the funeral because I didn't know how to grieve. I stood in front of another. He touched me when I was asleep, and I never told anyone because I thought it was my fault." We didn't cry. There was no space for that here. This wasn't a room for performance. This was a reckoning. I turned to Rachel. "We have to add hours." She nodded. Found a piece of charcoal lodged in the crack of a wall, and wrote I wore their silence like it was mine. Then handed it to me. I pressed the charcoal into the stone and carved my line. I lied so well, I forgot what the truth sounded like. The walls breathed. The air shifted. And for the first time, the room spoke back. "Then you are ready." A doorway appeared, not in the wall, but in the air, hanging mid-space like an unfinished sentence. No frame. No hinges. Just the possibility of exit. Rachel looked at me. "Where do you think it goes?" I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Wherever stories go when they're finally told right. We stepped through, and this time, the story followed us. The doorway dropped us in the middle of a street that looked real enough to fool most people. Fresh pavement, warm yellow lights humming from vintage lampposts, little shops with cheerful signs painted in the kind of cursive meant to whisper safety. Samantha's Flowers, Edna's Bakery, Tim's Records. Everything had a name. Every storefront bore the proud, smiling identity of a place pretending to belong to everyone. But the second our feet touched the sidewalk, we knew. This town wasn't real. Not really. It was curated, like a memory polished for tourists, the edges too neat, the color too warm. Even the air had a staged smell, fresh, cut grass, a hint of cinnamon, and the sweet, artificial calm of somewhere that didn't want questions. A place that kept its stories under thick, white paint. Rachel was the first to speak. "There's no dust." I looked closer. She was right. Not a speck on the window panes. No scuff marks on the benches. Not even dirt on the sidewalk. A town like this doesn't exist, unless someone built it to hide something. A bell rang in the distance. Old-fashioned. Hollow. We followed it, not because it called us, but because nothing else moved. There were no people, no passing cars, just static stores and perfect trees, and the sound of a bell from somewhere too far away for how loud it echoed. Then we saw the fountain. It sat in the middle of a roundabout, water frozen mid-splash like someone had paused time in the middle of a memory. And at its base, dozens, maybe hundreds, of photographs, scattered, piled, water-stained and faded from too much sun, faces, all staring up, some smiling, some not. Each one marked the same way, an X scratched across the bottom corner. Rachel knelt and picked one up. A girl, maybe 10, missing front teeth, eyes wide with glee. Someone had taken a knife and dragged a line across her mouth. I crouched beside her, flipped the photo over. There was writing. Scrawled, almost frantic, she told the truth. We didn't like it. My throat tightened. Rachel looked around. "This town is where the stories were buried," she said. "Not erased, just outvoted." I felt the sting of that sentence. Outvoted. 1,000 truths that weren't believed, because they didn't fit the version the town liked better. 1,000 people pushed into silence with a smile. We stood, and slowly the town began to wake. Shadows appeared in windows. Not people, just presences. Watching. Judging. The kind of gaze that doesn't want you to do wrong, just wants you to behave. A woman stepped out of the bakery, hair curled, apron clean, smile like a polished knife. "Well, look who came crawling back," she said, in a voice made of brittle cheer. Rachel blinked. "Do you know me?" The woman's smile widened. "No, but I know your type, stirring up trouble. Rewriting the past like it wasn't good enough the first time." Another door opened across the street. A man in a barber's smock leaned against the frame. "You're not welcome here," he said calmly. "We're not here for welcome," I answered. "We're here for what you buried." The fountain began to bubble. The water unfroze. The photos swirled at the bottom like leaves in a gutter. Rachel stepped to the edge. "What happened to them?" she asked. The woman folded her arms. "They made things complicated." "That's not a crime," I snapped. "It is when people are happy." The words hit like ice. That's what this town had been built on. A lie called happiness. A smile stretched over silence. A collective agreement to never go looking at the things that made people uncomfortable. Rachel turned to me. "We can't yell them into remembering." "No," I said, "but we can show them." We reached into the fountain, pulled out handfuls of the photos. Faces we didn't know but that belonged. People who'd been part of this place but had been excised like typos. And then we started pinning them. To the shop windows, to the benches, to the trees, to the signs that bore names but not truth. The townspeople didn't stop us. They couldn't. Their smiles began to twitch. Their eyes darted, because now the memory was leaking. Now the town couldn't pretend. With each photo pinned, the sky darkened, not storm dark but honest. The false sunlight gave way to something real. Clouds moved. Wind returned. A man stepped out of the record store, holding a photo in trembling hands. "This was my sister," he whispered. I thought she moved. Rachel met his eyes. She didn't. He nodded, tears falling. She told me something happened to her. I didn't believe her. I didn't want to. Another woman stepped forward, clutching a photo of a boy. "My son," she said softly. "They said he made it up." The town began to crack, not fall, just open, like plaster chipping off to reveal the bricks underneath. A new building rose from behind the bakery. Not fresh, not pristine. A courthouse. Old, splintered. Its doors rusted shut. I approached. They groaned open. Inside files, boxes, testimonies, reports, each one sealed, each one marked unsubstantiated. I turned to Rachel. "They didn't disappear." "No," she said. "They were archived. We carried the boxes outside, set them in the town square, opened them." The townspeople circled around, silent, afraid, hopeful. The woman from the bakery stepped forward. She reached into a box, pulled out a photo of the girl with missing front teeth. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered I knew. I just didn't want to deal with it. She turned to Rachel. "I'm sorry." And like that, the fountain burst. Water spilled into the street, washing the fake sunlight away. The storefronts peeled. Beneath the paint, murals, faces, names, stories, and on every wall, one sentence appeared. Etched in fading ink, truth doesn't ruin towns. It builds better ones. The townspeople didn't vanish. They stayed. And for the first time, they looked at each other without masks. Rachel turned to me, breath catching. "This wasn't a town." "No," I said. "It was a cover story, and now, it was real. We thought it was over. After the town, after the names, after the stories clawed their way back into the world, they told us we were done. That the house was gone. That we had pulled the thread and unraveled whatever it had once been. But you don't unbuild a place like that. You don't unmake what was never truly bricks and beams. Because the house had never been about structure. It had always been about weight, the weight of silence, the weight of the stories no one wanted to carry. And that weight, it had learned to travel. It followed us home. At first, it was small things. The sound of stairs creaking at 2 a.m., even though we lived in a single, level apartment. our bookshelves tilting slightly as if something heavier than time was pressing down on them. The flicker of lights when certain phrases were spoken aloud, sentences, like, "It wasn't that bad," or "Just forget it." The house hated those phrases. It always had. And now it made its hatred visible. Rachel was the first to see the door. Not on a wall, not in a hallway, but inside the mirror. Just behind her reflection, hanging in the air like an afterthought. A small, warped rectangle with peeling paint and a handle rusted over with years of closed mouths. She didn't scream. She just whispered my name, and I knew by the sound of her voice that the house hadn't been defeated. It had just moved in. I stepped into the bathroom beside her, and there it was. That door again. Not red this time, not elegant, just present, like an answer to a question we hadn't asked out loud. We didn't open it. We didn't need to. Because the house had stopped waiting for permission. The next day, our apartment changed. Not all at once. First, the wallpaper in the bedroom curled back to reveal writing underneath. Dozens of handprints, some smeared, some clear, each pressed into the wall like they were trying to claw their way in, or out. Then the living room began to tilt at an impossible angle. Not visually, emotionally. We'd sit on the couch and feel like the room wanted us to fall. Not from gravity, but from truth. At night, our dreams weren't ours anymore. We dreamed in other people's memories. The girl in the blue room, Nina, returned to me first. But she wasn't crying now. She was watching, waiting. Her hands cupped around something small and pulsing. A seed. She placed it in my hand. "It grows where silence is," she said. When I woke up, my hand still tingled. Rachel had her own dream. A man in a chair, his mouth sewn shut, holding a clipboard with her name on it. Every time she asked him a question, he bled from the ears. But he kept nodding, over and over, as if the pain was worth the answer. When she reached for the clipboard, the dream shattered. She woke up gasping, blood in her nose. The house wasn't done with us. It was reminding us that we had work left to do. We tried to move. Twice. The first time, our packed boxes rotted overnight. Cardboard melted into puddles of ink and ash. The second time, our GPS rerouted us in endless loops until we ended up right back where we started. Outside our own door, but with windows boarded shut from the inside. Rachel sat on the floor that night and whispered, "It's not the house anymore. It's us." And she was right. We had read the stories. We had named the forgotten. We had opened every locked room, and now we were the structure. The house had folded itself into our memories, our routines, our very language. The next morning we found the books. Dozens of them. All blank. Stacked neatly on our kitchen table, as if left by someone polite but uninvited. No names, no covers, just space waiting. A note sat atop them. Written in that sharp, elegant hand we knew too well. "You opened the doors. Now you have to keep them open." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't argue. We knew what it meant. This wasn't a horror story anymore. It was a responsibility. Every week, more books appeared. Some with whispers attached to them. Some with smells. Some with pages already filled in blood or pencil or scratched out ink. Each one a story someone had lost the strength to carry alone. And so, one by one, we began to read. At first, just the two of us. Then, others. People who'd walked away from towns like that one. People who had seen the door in their mirrors too. People who had stories that made their voices shake and their hands tremble. They came. They brought their books. They added to the shelf. They stayed. Not out of fear, but out of understanding that this house, this story, this thing, it didn't want to hurt anymore. It just didn't want to be forgotten. Sometimes the lights flicker still. Sometimes we wake with bruises in the shapes of sentences. But it doesn't scare us. It just reminds us that the house is still with us. That silence is still dangerous. That forgetting is still easy. And that the only way out was never escape. It was witnessing. So we keep the door open. We keep the pages turned. And we keep reading. Because as long as the house remembers, so must we. It appeared between our kitchen and the hallway, squeezed where no space should exist. One day, it was just there. No sound, no construction, no memory of walls moving. Just a door we never bought, painted a color we'd never seen before. Not red this time, not bone white. It was the color of ash right after the wind passes through it. A gray that didn't reflect light. It absorbed it like it fed on it. Rachel was the first to notice. She stopped in her tracks mid-sentence, her fork hovering in the air, mouth open but silent. I turned and followed her gaze, and there it was. Quiet, waiting, wrong. A doorknob tarnished to the point of looking melted, and on its center, etched in crooked, almost frantic strokes, unclaimed. We stood in front of it for almost an hour, not touching, not speaking, just listening. And what we heard wasn't noise. It was absence, not silence. No, silence has presence. This was emptiness so loud it pressed against the inside of your chest, like something had been screaming for years and finally went hoarse, then disappeared altogether. Rachel's voice broke the tension, small and dry. Why would a room be unclaimed? I knew what she meant. The house had always been full of memory. Pain had addresses. Grief had rooms. Names were carved into doors, into walls, into skin. But this was a door no one wanted to be responsible for. A door no one admitted to building. Which meant the truth behind it had been orphaned. Maybe, I said carefully, it belongs to something that was never supposed to happen. That sentence hung between us like humidity. Dense. Undeniable. Eventually we opened it. The air inside was stale, not from age, but from being ignored. It didn't have dust. It had layers of forgetfulness. The kind that happens when people deliberately don't ask questions. The room itself was small. No furniture, no windows. Just a single metal chair bolted to the center of the floor. And above it, strung from the ceiling like a puppet missing its strings, a voice recorder. Not a new one. A battered, clunky thing with plastic yellowed from age. It clicked on as soon as we stepped in. No buttons pressed. Just a low whir, and then. This is a record of the thing no one claimed. The voice was male. Shaky. Worn down to the marrow. It started with a scream no one answered. The sound of breathing filled the room, real, ragged, terrified breathing. Then a pause. They said it couldn't have happened. Because if it had, someone would have done something. Rachel sat on the edge of the chair. Her hands were shaking. The voice continued. So I stopped saying it happened. I swallowed it. I buried it. But it didn't die. It built walls. And now you're inside them. The recorder popped, fizzed. And then, static, long, lingering. Like the tape couldn't bring itself to stop. Rachel looked up at me. Her face was pale. It's not a room, she whispered. It's a testimony. I nodded, and no one believed it. So it became this. The walls trembled slightly, not violently, more like an exhale after a long, clenched silence. Then we saw the writing. Barely visible on the far wall, etched with a fingernail or maybe a key. If someone finds this, tell them it was real. Even if no one claimed it. Even if it doesn't fit their version. Even if it makes them uncomfortable. I moved closer, heart pounding. There were smaller words beneath the sentence. Scattered, disjointed. As if whoever had been in here tried to write more, but couldn't finish. They said I was confused. Said I wanted it. Said I should smile more. Each phrase was its own wound. Each one echoed something we'd heard before. Rachel stood suddenly. She reached into her pocket, pulled out one of the blank books we'd been finding each week. She laid it gently on the chair. Then, using a pen from her jacket, she wrote the word truth on the first page. Not the name of a person. Not a title. Just truth. And then she whispered, "Now it's claimed." The room shuddered. A single crack formed in the floor, and from that crack, a small sprout pushed through. Green, soft, defiant. The first living thing we'd seen in the room. I turned off the recorder. Its work was done. We walked out slowly, left the door open, And as we stepped back into our hallway, we saw something that froze us in place. Another door, smaller, newer, with a tag dangling from the handle. This one read "Denied." Rachel looked at me, eyes hollow. "How many of these are there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because now I understood. The house wasn't one place. It was everywhere someone's truth had been dismissed, minimized, rewritten, or ignored. Every unclaimed story had a room, and we had just become the ones finding the keys. It didn't open the way other doors did. Not with a creak. Not even a click. It unfolded, like skin pulled back to reveal a wound that had never truly scabbed over. The tag on the handle, "Denied," fluttered once, then dropped to the ground as if it, too, had decided it no longer wanted to be part of the lie. The room beyond was dim, not dark, lit by a sickly, yellow, gray hue like the sky before a tornado, charged with the threat of something unspoken. But the smell is what stopped us cold. Not rot, not mold. Something worse. It was the scent of paper that's been burned, but only halfway. Like someone tried to destroy the evidence and lost their nerve halfway through. Rachel stood just inside the threshold, jaw locked. I could tell she felt it too. This wasn't a room built for horror. It was built for erasure. The quiet kind. The kind that wears a smile and a handshake. The kind that says, "Are you sure?" And that doesn't sound like him. We stepped in. The door melted closed behind us. And the first thing we saw was the filing cabinet. Tall, rusted, humming softly as if breathing through its own exhaustion. Drawers labeled not with names, but excuses. Dozens of them. Too emotional. Asked for it. No witnesses. Not enough evidence. He's a good man. Each drawer a verdict. A closed case. A truth shoved down and filed away under reputation or inconvenience. Rachel reached for the top drawer. It screamed. Not loud. Not noise. But pain, pure and raw, like the metal itself was reliving every time it was used to silence someone. She yanked it open anyway. Inside papers, torn and crumpled, some soaked through, with stains that looked too red to be ink. At the very back, a cassette recorder and a stack of cassettes. No labels, just numbers. She picked one at random, pressed play. A voice crackled through the static. Young, female, barely holding together. I told the counselor, but he said maybe I misunderstood, that I shouldn't ruin a man's life over a mistake. Click. Next tape. I reported it. Twice. They said the cameras were down. Said it didn't match his story. Said I should be more careful. Click. He smiled while I cried, and they said I was hysterical. Each voice peeled away another layer of composure until we stood trembling, not from fear, but from rage. Quiet. Cold rage. The kind you feel when truth becomes evidence, and evidence becomes inadmissible. There were hundreds of tapes. Thousands, maybe. Each one a denied story. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was uncomfortable. Rachel leaned on the edge of the cabinet, her breath ragged. "We weren't meant to listen," she whispered. "We're not just listening anymore," I said. "We're archiving." She nodded. Then reached for one of the books we'd been carrying. Still blank. She opened it, placed one of the tapes gently inside, and closed it. The moment the cover shut, the book hummed, as if it had accepted its first truth. It was no longer blank, and the tape vanished, absorbed, protected. We looked around. The room was endless. Rows of cabinets, some tipped over, some locked, some still smoking from fires long since put out. "This room doesn't end," Rachel murmured. "It's not supposed to," I said, "because the denials haven't stopped." The truth hit like a stone in the gut. The house was still growing. Every time someone was gaslit, dismissed, silenced, the room got bigger. A new cabinet appeared. Another drawer slammed shut on someone's cry. We couldn't stop the denials. But we could record the stories. We could witness them. So we got to work. One by one, we opened drawers. We picked the tapes. We wrote what we heard. We gave names to the faceless. Not because it would fix what happened, but because it meant they weren't alone. Hours passed. Or days. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the room began to change. Not brighter, but lighter. The weight shifted. The air, no longer suffocating, began to let itself move. The cabinets stopped groaning. One by one, they crumbled, turned to ash. Not forgotten, but freed. Rachel held the last book we'd filled. It glowed faintly, a warm pulse under her fingers. She looked at me. We need more books. I nodded, and the room gave them to us. Not blank this time. Ready, the door appeared again, whole, quiet, and above it, newly carved believed, we stepped out, into night, the real world. Cars drove by. People walked past, the world still turning, unaware of what lay beneath its feet. Rachel looked up, at the stars, at the open sky, and whispered, "We're going to need help." I smiled. We already have it. Because we did. Somewhere, we knew. Others were finding doors of their own. And just like us, they were listening. It didn't wait for us to find it. This door came to us. Arrived overnight, nailed directly into the inside of our bedroom closet. We'd opened that closet 100 times. Sheets, laundry, old coats we didn't wear anymore. And yet that morning, it stood there as if it had always been part of the frame. Black wood, warped and heavy, like it had been soaked in stormwater and regret. The handle was smooth bone, worn down from being gripped too tightly too often. There was no tag this time, no title or warning. Just an engraving so faint you had to squint come clean. We stared at it for hours, not out of fear, but because some part of us already knew. This one was personal. It wouldn't lead to the forgotten or the denied. It wouldn't whisper names of others or echo stories long buried. No, this door led inward, to what we hadn't said, what we still refused to say, even to each other. We didn't open it right away. We made coffee. We paced. We stared at the sky like it might give us permission not to walk through. It didn't. Eventually, Rachel placed her hand on the knob. It turned without resistance, like it had been waiting. The inside was a corridor, but not a long one. Just 10 steps. 10 very specific, very deliberate steps. Each one lit from beneath by something unseen, like walking across the surface of someone else's pulse. And on each step, a memory appeared on the walls around us. Not random, not dramatic. Intimate. Private. We didn't speak as the first one appeared. Rachel, 12 years old, staring into a mirror and whispering, "If I act like them, maybe I'll be okay." Her reflection was already crying. Then the second. Me at 17, holding a photo of someone I claimed I'd never loved. Burning it. Laughing so no one would notice my hands shaking. Third Rachel again. In bed beside someone she didn't love, smiling through the shame because it was easier than sleeping alone. Fourth me, sitting in my car outside a hospital, too afraid to walk inside and say goodbye before it was too late. Each step stripped another layer, not of pain, but of the lies we'd told ourselves about our pain. And with each step, the hallway narrowed. We had to walk single file, alone. At the 7th step, we were separated by a wall of glass. Not soundproof, not shatterproof, just enough to make our reflections watch us without being able to stop what was coming. Rachel pressed her palm to the glass. So did I. And we walked the final 3 steps. The 9th showed me something I had never admitted, not even in the quiet of my own mind. A moment in my childhood where I could have spoken up for someone else. But I didn't. I watched. I chose silence. And I buried that choice so deeply, I convinced myself I hadn't been there at all. The 10th step was worse. There was no image, just a sound. Rachel's voice, my voice, saying something we both remembered saying, in different years, in different contexts, but with the same cowardice. It wasn't my responsibility. The words ricocheted off the walls like bullets. And then the corridor ended. A small room, white, bare. In the center, a basin of water, still as glass, and beside it 2 black stones. On each stone, a single word, yours. We looked at each other, and we understood. We weren't here to forget or forgive. We were here to own. Rachel picked up one of the stones, dropped it into the basin. The water didn't ripple. It lit up, a soft, blue glow. She spoke, her voice barely audible. I betrayed myself more than anyone else ever did. The water shimmered. Accepted it. I picked up the second stone, held it a long time, then dropped it in. My silence made me complicit. No punishment came. No horror emerged. Just quiet. True quiet. Like someone had been screaming inside us for years. And finally, we'd let them out. The room began to change. The white faded. The floor softened. Grass grew beneath our feet, wild and untamed. And the walls dissolved into trees. A forest, real, breathing. The house had never led us to peace. It had led us to reckoning. And from that came release. We stepped into the forest. The door behind us faded, but in its place stood a new path. A trail, marked only by footprints. Ours. Rachel turned to me. We weren't supposed to survive the house. I nodded. But we did. Why us? And the answer came not in words, but in feeling, because we listened. Because we told the truth, even when it hurt. Because we stopped asking for permission to feel what others said wasn't real. And now we were the ones with the keys. We found it just off the forest trail, hidden in a bend so tight it felt like we'd been swallowed by trees. The air shifted. Warmer, heavier. The path gave way to cobblestones, overgrown with moss that wasn't green so much as the color of forgetting. And there it stood, a building too large to hide in any real forest, but somehow it had. A library made of stone blackened by rain and time, with windows sealed by wax, and a door that looked like it hadn't been touched in centuries. No sign, no inscription. No lights, just the undeniable weight of everything people once tried to remember and failed. We didn't knock. The door opened with a groan, like a tired breath held too long. Inside, the ceiling vanished into darkness, and the walls curved away into a circular abyss of shelves, shelves upon shelves upon shelves. Thousands of them, possibly millions. Not just floor to ceiling, but floor to sky. The books here weren't alphabetized. They weren't ordered by genre or author. There were no sections, no logic, no index. Only chaos, and yet every single book vibrated with a hum we could feel in our teeth. These were memories. Not just stories, actual memories. Unspoken, unresolved, unclaimed. We stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind us. The sound didn't echo, it absorbed. Like this place didn't let anything leave. Rachel ran her hand along the spine of a book that had no title, only a deep scar running down the middle. Why would the house bring us here? She whispered. I looked around, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Because someone has to read them. She shook her head. There are too many. I don't think we're supposed to read them all, I said. Just the ones that are ready. We walked slowly, each step cushioned by dust and time. Every so often, a book would thrum, a subtle vibration, like a pulse under its skin. That's how we knew which ones wanted to be heard. The first book I opened wasn't written in sentences. Just images. A boy trapped under a table while voices shouted above him. A dog that wouldn't stop barking. A hand gripping a belt. The sound of a refrigerator humming louder than it should. No context. Just moments. But they didn't need explanation. They were felt. Rachel opened another. A woman sitting in her car outside a courthouse, her knuckles white around the steering wheel, the seat beside her empty. The paper she held had her name on it, misspelled. The verdict had been read. She hadn't been believed. The book ended there. These are the ones that got lost, Rachel said. I nodded. The ones that didn't make it to the rooms. The ones too quiet to form a door. They weren't erased. They were stored, unfiled, misplaced, forgotten, but still here, and that meant they could still be remembered. A sound echoed through the space suddenly, a low rustling like hundreds of pages turning at once. Then a staircase descended from the ceiling, made of the same blackened wood as the door, creaking with each inch it unfolded. At its base a table, and on it, a single book, bigger than the rest. This one wasn't humming, it was breathing. We stepped forward. The cover was blank. The edges of the pages curled with age, or maybe resistance. Rachel reached out, but the book opened on its own, and we saw something neither of us expected: ourselves. Every room we had walked through, every door we had opened, every confession we had recorded. The house had been writing our story, even as we tried to record others. Not as heroes, not even as witnesses, as part of the structure. Each page showed our footsteps through places we thought we were discovering, when really we were being guided, molded, tested. And then the pages turned faster. Moments we hadn't lived yet, rooms we hadn't entered, doors we hadn't found. I slammed the book shut. Rachel's face had gone pale. That wasn't a journal, she said. It was a blueprint. Of what? Of us. Of the house, maybe both. Behind us, the shelves began to shift. Books floated from the stacks, their pages fluttering, filling the air with the sound of voices murmuring over each other, some scared, some angry, some begging. One landed in Rachel's hands. She opened it without hesitation, and her eyes filled with tears. "It's her," she whispered. "Nina, the girl from the blue room. The one who handed me the seed in the dream." Her story was longer now, not just pain. She'd grown older in the pages, found words for what had been done, fought to speak, had her truth twisted, then found someone who believed her. One person. That's all it took to crack the silence. And from that crack, she rebuilt herself. Not whole, not the same, but free. Rachel looked up at me. "They're evolving," she said. "The stories. They're growing past the hurt." And that was when I understood. This wasn't just a library of pain. It was a living archive of healing. But only if someone read them. Only if someone saw. Suddenly, one of the walls split. A path appeared, carved not in stone but in words. Pages laid end to end, forming a trail. The path wound up toward the ceiling, leading higher than the eye could follow. At the top we saw a door, a new one, not red, not black, but mirrored, reflective. It showed us as we were, tired, cracked, but standing, alive, changed. Rachel whispered, "What do you think's behind it?" I looked at the path, the books, the breathing, pulsing archive behind us, and I answered, "Maybe the part where we stop being part of the housey and start building something else." We took the first step, and the books whispered after us, "Not goodbye, just keep going." We climbed the path built from stories, our feet brushing across words that once lived in silence, now laid bare to hold our weight. The higher we went, the more the air changed. It became clearer, colder, but not empty. It felt charged, like the pause before a word someone has spent their whole life learning how to say. The mirrored door at the top wasn't just reflecting us anymore. It shimmered like water held in tension, and as we approached, our reflections stopped mimicking us. They didn't move when we did. They just stared. Rachel was the first to notice. "They're not us." I stepped closer. My reflection stood still, watching me with something in its eyes I couldn't name. It wasn't anger, wasn't pity, it was knowledge. The kind that comes only after something inside you has been completely torn down and rebuilt with the parts you tried to throw away. The door didn't have a knob, no handle, just our faces staring back, asking silently, "Are you ready to see the version of you that knows the whole truth?" It opened without touch. No creak, no wind, just absence, pulled apart into space large enough to step through. And on the other side was the last place we expected a house. But not the one we'd known, not the haunted one, not the sprawling, shifting maze of wounds and buried screams. This house looked ordinary. 2 stories, white fence, porch swing, garden growing wild but vibrant. It could have been anyone's home, which made it worse, because we both recognized it, not from memory, but from fear. "This is where I was hurt," Rachel said, her voice barely above a breath. I didn't need to ask how she knew, because my heart sank at the exact same moment. "This is where I learned how to lie," I said. The porch boards creaked as we stepped onto them. Not menacingly, not threatening, just tired. Inside, everything was warm, soft colors. The comfortable furniture. The kind of place people might describe as cozy. But that word was a lie, because this was the house where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. And yet everything did. In this house, the silence was louder than screams. In this house, things were covered in kindness, but they were still cruel. Each room held a memory, now rebuilt in perfect detail. Not twisted by the house, not haunted, just true. In the kitchen, Rachel stood watching her younger self sit at a table while a relative made a joke that crossed a line no one acknowledged. The adults laughed. She forced a smile, bit her cheek so hard she bled. No one noticed. In the living room, I saw myself watching TV while my father stared at the screen blankly, a bottle at his side. My mother whispered, "Don't upset him," and I nodded like a soldier receiving orders. We moved through the house like ghosts, visiting the moments that shaped us. Not the violent ones, not the ones people wrote about, just the quiet betrayals, the subtle rot. And that's when we saw them, sitting at the dining table. Our reflections, but older, not in years, but in knowing. Rachel stepped toward hers. "Who are you?" she asked. The reflection smiled, not crudely, not kindly, just honestly. "I'm who you became the day you stopped pretending it didn't matter." Mine turned to me. "And I'm the version of you that never apologized for surviving." We stood frozen. These weren't visions. These were options. Choices we hadn't made yet. Paths we could still walk. They weren't asking us to go back. They were asking us to go forward. Rachel sat down across from hers. "I'm still scared." So was I, her reflection said. But I stopped letting that be the reason I stayed small. I took a seat too, and my reflection leaned forward. "You think your story makes you weak," it said. "But your silence was never survival. It was a holding pattern. Now you get to fly." The house shimmered. Walls faded, and the table between us began to glow, dim, golden, steady. From its center, 2 more books emerged, not blank, not forgotten, ours. I reached out, held mine. It felt heavier than all the others we'd carried. Rachel did the same. On the cover of hers was a single word: believed. Mine said enough. And just like that, we understood. This house wasn't for haunting. It was for reclaiming. Every room had been rebuilt not to scare us, but to give us space to come back and say this happened. And I survived it, and I will not forget. The reflections stood. And as they walked toward the back of the house, they opened a final door. One that led not to darkness, but to a path lit by every story we'd ever read, every voice we'd ever heard, every soul that had once been told to be quiet. Rachel took my hand. Together, we walked out the door, and the house didn't disappear. It stood taller, because now it was seen, and no house, no story, no truth ever stays haunted when someone is willing to live in it again. The path beyond the mirror house led us to a clearing that hadn't been there before. Wide, quiet, the ground covered in ash that stirred even without wind. Above us, the sky had shifted into that unsettling shade of orange, gray, the kind you see before a wildfire devours a horizon. But there was no smoke, no heat, just the thread of fire, held tight in the air like a secret not yet spoken. And in the center of the clearing, rising from cracked stone, stood a bonfire that did not flicker. No flames, just embers, glowing red, patient, still, as if waiting for permission to roar. We stopped at the edge of the ash, uncertain. The fire didn't move, didn't beckon. It knew we'd come. That was the difference. Every room, every door, every whisper in the house had tested us. But this was the one part of the house that didn't ask. It simply existed. And it expected us to be honest about why we came. Rachel was the first to speak. "It's not a trap," I nodded. "No, it's an offering." She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and the ash didn't sink. It rose, light as dust, curling around her like forgotten prayers. I followed. The air grew heavier with every step. Not hotter, just fuller. Like walking into a room where 1,000 people had once screamed and now waited in breathless silence for someone to finally speak their name. When we reached the fire, we saw them. Not people, not shadows, but silhouettes carved into the air, burn marks suspended mid-air, shaped like those who had been silenced and set alight by shame. They didn't move. They watched. And in the center, floating above the embers, were our books. Rachel's believed. Mine enough. They hovered like they weren't made of paper anymore. Like they'd become vessels. And then the fire moved. Not up, not out, but inward. It pulled itself tighter, coiling like a memory being forced into a box too small for what it contained. And it spoke. Not aloud, not with sound, but straight into the bones. What will you give to make it stop growing? I looked at Rachel. She looked at me. We understood. This wasn't about burning the stories. It was about burning what kept them from being told. The shame, the silence, the fear. The lies we still told ourselves about why certain people didn't matter, why certain wounds weren't real, why some stories didn't deserve daylight. We stepped to the edge of the flame. Rachel held her book in both hands. I believed in others, she said quietly. But I never believed myself. The fire leaned toward her. She stepped back, but only once. Then she opened the book and held it high. I released the version of me who thought pain had to be earned. That truth only counted if someone else agreed with it. She let the book fall. It didn't burn. It glowed. The fire accepted it like a letter finally addressed. Then turned to me. I held my book tighter. I said I was enough. I whispered, but I still carried the weight of every time someone told me I wasn't. My throat tightened. I released the part of me that stayed small to make others comfortable. I dropped the book, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the fire flared, not angrily, not destructively, but completely. It rose and expanded, and in its heat I felt no pain, only clarity. Every story we'd collected, every room we'd walked, every door we dared open, they weren't meant to be archived. They were meant to be lit, not to erase them, but to spread them. Because fire doesn't just destroy, it clears, it renews, it makes space. The silhouettes around us began to rise, not fade, rise. And from their ashes bloomed light. It poured across the clearing, up the trees, into the sky. It didn't erase the house. It made it visible. Every hidden hallway, every sealed door, all of it now stood seen. Rachel reached for my hand. We stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by fire that no longer burned and light that no longer hurt. And the fire whispered one last time, "You are no longer guests. You are caretakers." The wind returned, soft, final. When we turned back, the path behind us had changed. It led not to the beginning, but to something next. The house would never be gone, because stories like these don't disappear. But it no longer owned us. And from now on, we would be the ones who held the matches. The air changed as soon as we stepped off the ashes, not back to what it had been before, but something unfamiliar. Lighter, yes, but also quieter in a way that made our footsteps feel like shouts. The forest that once bordered the house no longer loomed. The trees had pulled back, bowed, as if giving us room, or maybe respect. The path underfoot wasn't built of story pages anymore. It was stone, real, steady. As if the house had finally decided we deserved something solid. We didn't speak for a long time. After the fire, there wasn't much left to say. Some truths don't echo, they settle. But then we saw it, the house. Still standing, still enormous, but no longer shifting, no longer pulsing with secrets. The windows were open now. The front door stood ajar. Light spilled out, not in beams, but in soft glows, like the house was exhaling after a century of holding its breath. And it was no longer just our house. They were here. Others. Walking the grounds, standing in doorways, staring at rooms we'd once been trapped in. Some had books in hand. Others clutched drawings. Some held nothing at all, but still stood with posture that said, "I've come to tell my part." We watched as a woman, maybe 50, placed a photograph into the mailbox that used to be rusted shut. The moment she closed the lid, a door on the second floor cracked open. No wind, just permission. A teenager with headphones was scribbling something on the porch wall. No one stopped him. In fact, a child came and added to it, a scribble over a scribble. Laughter broke through. Rachel's eyes welled. They found it. I nodded. Or maybe it found them. We stepped forward, and the house didn't resist. Inside, it had changed. The hallways weren't lined with screams anymore. The rooms weren't cold. The air no longer buzzed with the pressure of hidden things. Instead, the house felt lived in, like a place where people had come to set things down, not to bury them, but to share the weight. We passed the blue room. The door was open. Inside, Nina was sitting on the floor, talking to another girl. Neither of them spoke above a whisper, but the way they sat, cross-legged, palms up, heads tilted toward one another, said everything. The silence in that room was earned. The red room was unrecognizable. Gone were the peeling walls, the long, rotting dining table. Now it was a gallery, pages taped to walls, names written boldly, some in crayon, some in tears, one in lipstick. The table was gone. In its place was a circle of chairs, unbroken. We didn't cleanse it, Rachel said. We transformed it. I corrected her gently. We listened. It did the rest. We reached the heart of the house, the foyer, where once all the doors had hung waiting. Now, only one door stood at the center, polished wood, no rust, no whispering handle. Just a plaque, the room of truth. We looked at each other. Then we opened it. Inside was nothing, just light, and a table. On it sat every book we had ever placed into the house, ours and others, the ones about denial, about silence, about things unspoken and things screamed. Every spine glowed faintly, and one book sat in the center, larger than the rest, still blank, waiting. There was no pen, no chair, just invitation. Rachel walked to it and placed her hand on the cover. Her fingers trembled. Then she said, "This is the one we write together." She looked at me. "At least, if you're ready." I took a breath and said the only thing I could. "I've been ready since the first door." The walls of the room expanded. Not physically, emotionally, like it was growing to hold everything we hadn't said yet, everything we were finally ready to share. Others began entering, one by one, holding pages, memories, shards of story. They placed them in the center, and the book accepted them, not with glow, not with noise, just with presence. And I realized then, this house had never been about ghosts. Not really. It was about testimony. About how truth doesn't rot when it's aired. It blooms. The final truth of the house was simple. It never wanted revenge. It wanted to be witnessed, to be believed, to be remembered. And now it was. Forever. The fireplace roared softly behind us. The mirrors no longer showed twisted reflections. The staircase no longer groaned beneath fear. This was no longer a haunted house. It was a living one. And every person who walked through its doors helped keep it alive. Not by feeding it stories, but by refusing to hide them anymore. Rachel turned to me and smiled. Tired, full, honest. "We're home," she said. And for the first time in all the long, aching, twisting journey, I believed her. The morning came slowly, filtered through windows that were no longer barricaded with memory. Light moved across the floors like it belonged there, casting soft gold across walls that used to hum with dread. And for the first time since we stepped into the house all those weeks ago, there was nothing lurking beneath it. No sudden wind, no hidden staircases, no locked doors whispering to be open. It was quiet in the way most places never are, complete. Rachel and I stood in what used to be the entryway. Now, it felt like the center of something sacred. Around us, the people who had found the house in the days after us still walked its halls, touching doorframes, placing drawings, poems, notes, little fragments of pain offered up without fear of being ignored. The house had taken them in, not to haunt them, but to honor them. And each time a new story entered, the house stretched. Without creak or protest, without cracking at the foundation. It simply made room. But there was one last door. We'd both seen it as soon as we woke. At the far end of the hallway where the very first door, the red one, once stood, there was now a door made of something impossible. It wasn't metal, or wood, or glass. It looked like the moment before a wave breaks. Clear, suspended, heavy with potential. When we approached, it didn't reflect us. It didn't react to us at all. It simply waited. There was no label, no handle. But we knew. This door wasn't for a story that needed to be heard. It was for a story that was done. A door meant not for entering, but for leaving. Rachel reached out first. Her fingers hovered just inches away, and she whispered, "It's not goodbye." "No," I agreed, stepping beside her. "It's the part where we step outside and begin again." Because that was the hardest thing the house ever asked of us. Not to face ghosts, not to listen to screams, not even to bleed for forgotten memories. The hardest part was surviving all that and choosing to keep living. Choosing to take the truth with us into the world that tried to bury it. "I'm scared," she said. "I know," I said. "So am I." The house had changed us. Not just what we knew, not just what we carried, but what we were. Before this, we were people surviving trauma. Now, we were people carrying witness. And that's heavier than it sounds. But it's also powerful. Because silence doesn't stand a chance when even one person is willing to say, "I heard you." I stepped forward and touched the door. It wasn't solid. It rippled like breath held too long, and then it opened. Not into another hallway, or another trial, or another test. It opened into morning. A world outside. Unfiltered, real. There was grass beneath our feet, and a sky above that no longer pressed down. The house stood behind us. Proud, still alive. Not a trap. Not a wound. A testament. And inside it, stories waited, not to haunt, but to heal. We walked away slowly. No need to run anymore. Rachel turned once to look back. "They'll keep coming, won't they?" "Yes," I said. "But now they'll know it's safe." And that was the point. The house had never wanted to trap people. It wanted them to finish what they started. To speak the truth. To remember that their story didn't end in the worst room. It began in the moment they stepped back out. We didn't leave empty-handed. We carried one last book between us, bound in soft cloth, with no title on the front. Only a symbol, an open door, blank pages inside. Not because nothing had been written yet, but because the next story was yours. The door closed behind us. But the house remained, and whenever someone is ready to remember, to speak, to be believed, it will be waiting. Not to punish, not to scare, but to say welcome. Let me hold your truth too. The house still stands, not as a curse, not as a legend, but as a promise. And that is where our story ends, and where yours maybe finally begins.